My name is Charmaine, 35 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward smirking. "You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in disabled every family credit account and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house, with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool, was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue, at my mother Elaine's insistence despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary in prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight as joined honor societies and eventually built a career that made me completely financially independent. I thought I had finally broken the cycle of toxic relationships when I moved to Atlanta and married Darius. He was a charismatic commercial real estate broker, someone who seemed to appreciate my drive and intellect. He played the part of the perfect supportive husband while I worked late nights coding financial software and building my company. But I was terribly wrong. The ultimate betrayal did not come from my mother or my siblings. It came from the man sharing my bed. Let us skip the exhausting details of the funeral and jump straight to the night that changed my life forever. It was exactly 4 hours after the reading of my grandpa Elias's will. Grandpa was the only person in my family who truly saw me. He was a self-made man who built an entire commercial real estate empire from a single barbershop in the West End. While my parents squandered their money trying to keep up appearances at the country club, Grandpa Elias recognized my analytical mind. He taught me how to read a balance sheet before I could even drive. That afternoon, the estate lawyer announced that Grandpa had bypassed my greedy parents entirely and left his entire portfolio to me. I had inherited a trust valued at $12 million. I stood in our master bathroom staring blindly into the mirror as I washed off my waterproof mascara. The heavy emotional weight of the day was pressing down on my chest. The house was quiet. The heavy oak door of the bathroom pushed open, and Darius walked in. He did not step up behind me to wrap his arms around my waist. He did not offer a shoulder for my grief. Instead, his reflection in the mirror showed a man with cold, calculating eyes. He held a thick manila envelope. Without a single word of comfort, he dropped it onto the marble vanity right next to my makeup remover. The heavy thud echoed loudly in the tiled room. I looked down at the documents spilling out from the envelope. At the top, in bold black letters, were the words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." I froze, the damp washcloth stopping halfway to my face. I turned to him, searching his expression for a joke, a mistake, a moment of madness brought on by the stress of the week. But Darius just leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his expensive tailored shirt, looking completely relaxed. "I want a divorce," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "We have irreconcilable differences, Charmaine. It is time we both move on." My chest tightened, a cold wave of shock washing over me. "Irreconcilable differences?" I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. "We were just talking about renovating the kitchen last week. My grandfather just died, Darius. We just buried him today. And you are handing me divorce papers right now." "Timing is everything in business," he replied, an arrogant smirk playing on his lips. "And since we are dissolving this partnership, we need to talk about assets. I have already spoken to my attorneys. I am entitled to 50% of everything you own. That includes the $12 million you inherited this afternoon." The sheer audacity of his words knocked the breath right out of me. I stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of his sudden greed. "That money is from my grandfather," I said, finding my voice and letting it harden. "It is an inheritance, Darius. By law, inheritance is separate property. You do not have a claim to a single dime of it. Darius let out a low, dark chuckle. He pushed off the door frame and took a slow, deliberate step toward me, towering over my frame. His expensive cologne mixed with the scent of my jasmine soap, creating a suffocating cloud in the small space. "You have always been so smart with your software and your algorithms, Charmaine," he whispered patronizingly, tapping his finger against the marble vanity. "But you really should have paid more attention to marital law. Let me educate you on how things work in the real world." He reached out and tapped a manicured finger directly against the divorce petition. "3 months ago," he said softly, his eyes locking onto mine, "I came to you with a problem. I told you my brokerage firm was having a slow quarter, and we needed to make a massive balloon payment on our primary mortgage to avoid losing this beautiful house. I asked you to help me out." My mind raced back to that specific conversation. He had been so stressed pacing the floors and practically begging me to use a portion of an early trust disbursement Grandpa Elias had given me before he passed away. "You wrote a check for $100,000. Darius continued, thoroughly enjoying the sound of his own voice. "And where did you deposit that check, Charmaine? You did not pay the mortgage company directly. You deposited it into our joint checking account, our shared marital account." A sickening realization began to form in the pit of my stomach as I listened to him. "That is right," Darius smiled, seeing the dawn of understanding on my face. "You commingled the funds. By depositing that inheritance money into a joint account used for marital expenses, you legally blended your separate inheritance with our shared assets. The invisible wall protecting your separate property shattered the second that check cleared. My lawyers have already drafted the legal arguments. Because of that single deposit, the entire $12 million trust is now subject to equitable distribution. It is marital property now, and I am taking my half." I stood paralyzed, staring at the man I had loved and supported for 5 years. He had planned this entire thing. The supposed financial crisis 3 months ago was a completely fabricated emergency. It was a calculated trap designed solely to taint my inheritance. He had been plotting to leave me and steal my grandfather's legacy before Grandpa was even in the ground. When my mother had screamed at the lawyer's office today, Darius had sat there holding my hand, playing the dutiful protector. Now I realized he was just quietly calculating his own massive payout. "My Atlanta legal team is filing a temporary injunction tomorrow morning, as soon as the courthouse opens," Darius announced, stepping back and straightening his cuffs, as if he had just closed a routine business deal. "The judge will freeze all access to the $12 million until the divorce is finalized, and the assets are formally divided. You will not be able to touch a single cent of it. You always thought you were the smartest person in the room, Charmaine, but you were too busy staring at your computer screens to see what was happening right in front of you." He turned toward the bedroom, pausing at the threshold to deliver his final blow. "Oh, and Charmaine, I need you to pack a bag and sleep in the guest room tonight. I have an early morning meeting with my broker, and I need a good night's sleep without any emotional disruptions." He walked out, leaving the door wide open. For a long moment, the only sound in the bathroom was the steady drip of the faucet. The shock and betrayal threatened to pull me under, to reduce me to a sobbing mess on the cold tile floor. I could feel the tears burning the back of my eyes. The crushing weight of a broken marriage and a hijacked legacy was pressing down on my chest. But I did not cry. The sadness evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Darius thought he was dealing with a naive, heartbroken wife. He thought his slick real estate lawyers could blindside me with a textbook commingling trap. He forgot exactly who I was and what I did for a living. I reached out and calmly closed the bathroom door, turning the lock with a definitive click. I grabbed a towel, dried my face, and walked over to the built-in vanity desk where I kept my personal laptop. I flipped the screen open. The glow of the monitor illuminated the dark bathroom. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing standard security protocols and logging directly into the encrypted servers I used for my most complex software development projects. This was the exact same secure network I used to track digital footprints, analyze financial data streams, and build security architectures that major banks relied on. I watched the lines of code cascade down the screen, my mind already 10 steps ahead of his high-priced attorneys. I pulled up the digitized banking records, the wire transfer histories, and the metadata of every single transaction Darius had made over the last 2 years. You really thought you could outsmart a developer who builds forensic financial tracking software? Darius muttered to the empty room, a dangerous smile spreading across my face. I clicked into a hidden directory I had established months ago when I first noticed slight discrepancies in his credit card statements. The folder was labeled with his initials. It contained absolutely everything. The hidden offshore accounts, the diverted real estate commissions, the fake shell companies he used to hide his money. The commingled funds trap he set for me was cute, but it required the money to actually come from my grandfather in the first place. And I had a massive secret of my own about that $100,000 check. Tomorrow morning, Darius would walk into his lawyer's office expecting to hold all the cards. He expected me to beg to negotiate to surrender half of my grandfather's empire just to make the pain and humiliation stop. Instead, I was going to systematically dismantle his entire life. He wanted to play a ruthless game of assets and liabilities. He wanted to use the law to steal the only thing my grandfather had left me. I was going to show him exactly what a zero balance looked like, and I was going to make sure he lost everything he cared about in the process. I did not sleep that night. I did not shed a single tear. Tears are a waste of hydration when you have a complex financial puzzle to solve, and I was about to dissect my husband's life with the precision of a surgeon. I moved from the cold marble of the bathroom vanity to my home office. This was a room Darius rarely entered because it lacked mirrored walls, expensive leather couches, and an audience to stroke his ego. I sat in my ergonomic chair and booted up my primary workstation. 2 massive curved monitors flickered to life, bathing the dark, quiet room in a stark white glow. As a forensic accountant and a software developer, my entire career was built on one fundamental premise. Numbers never lie. People lie. Husbands lie with terrifying ease. But bank routing numbers, encrypted tax returns, and digital audit trails tell the absolute, undeniable truth. I pulled up the shared cloud drive for Darius's commercial real estate brokerage. He thought his data was completely secure because he routinely changed his administrative password every 90 days. He did not realize that I had installed a quiet, undetectable backdoor in his network architecture 3 years ago when he had begged me to upgrade his firm's cybersecurity protocols to save him the cost of hiring an external IT firm. I bypassed his firewall in less than 30 seconds. I started pulling down Schedule K-1 tax forms, corporate tax returns, operating agreements, and quarterly profit and loss statements. The financial data flowed across my dual screens in endless structured columns. For the first 2 hours, everything looked perfectly normal. Actually, it looked too normal. The gross revenue matched the reported income down to the penny. The payroll taxes were filed correctly with the state of Georgia. But when you hunt corporate fraud for a living, you learn very quickly that a perfectly balanced, flawless ledger is usually the very first sign of a massive cover-up. Nobody in high-stakes commercial real estate runs a pristine ledger unless they are actively trying to hide a secondary shadow set of books. Grandpa Elias used to sit with me at his dining room table when I was 12, running his thick, calloused fingers over his property management ledgers. He always told me that a man's true character is printed on his bank statements. If you want to know what a man truly values, do not listen to his words. Look at his debit column. I poured myself a second cup of strong black coffee, the bitter taste grounding me in the reality of the situation. I dug deeper, moving past the polished front-facing documents and diving into his raw vendor disbursement logs. I was looking for the real reason he wanted a divorce so suddenly. A man like Darius, obsessed with image and comfort, does not walk away from a stable marriage and a beautiful custom-built home unless he already has a separate safety net constructed and waiting for him. Furthermore, he certainly does not orchestrate a highly complicated, legally risky commingling trap with my inheritance just for the thrill of the game. He needed that $6 million for a specific urgent purpose. By 3 in the morning, the caffeine was humming violently in my veins, and the cracks in his perfect financial facade finally began to show. I found massive glaring discrepancies in his recent commission reports. Over the last 8 months, his brokerage had closed 4 major commercial deals in the downtown Atlanta financial district. The public records showed the sales were highly profitable. However, the commission payouts deposited into his primary corporate checking account were exactly 40% lower than the standard industry rate for those specific zip codes. Where was the missing 40% going? I ran a custom tracing algorithm I had developed for banking clients on his outgoing wire transfers. The software took less than 5 minutes to flag a recurring monthly anomaly. Every single month, precisely on the 15th, a payment of $8,500 was wired from a subsidiary shell company under his brokerage to a high-end property management firm. On the official books, it was categorized vaguely as a corporate marketing and staging expense. That was a sloppy, arrogant amateur mistake. I cross-referenced the payment routing number with the state business registry and hit the jackpot. It was not a marketing expense. It was a lease payment. Darius was renting a luxury penthouse in a high-rise building downtown. But the lease was just the beginning. Tied to that exact same shell company was a hidden American Express Centurion card, a black Amex. He had kept this card entirely off our joint credit reports, hiding it behind a corporate veil. I hacked into the statement history using a simple brute force password bypass. I knew his predictable psychology. He favored using his college fraternity initiation year combined with his mother's maiden name. The statements loaded onto my screen, and the reality of his secret double life hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The monthly charges were absolutely staggering. There was a $10,000 charge at a boutique jeweler in Buckhead for a diamond tennis bracelet. I certainly never received a tennis bracelet. There was a $4,000 charge at an exclusive luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. During a weekend, he explicitly claimed to be attending a tedious real estate compliance conference in Chicago. There were thousands more dropped at high-end steakhouses, expensive day spas, and designer boutiques that did not even carry my clothing size. He was not just having a casual affair. He was actively funding an entirely parallel life using embezzled money from his own business partners. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together in my mind. He had drained his company's operational capital to impress a mistress, and he was terrified. He needed my $12 million inheritance to fill the gaping hole in his firm's accounts before his partners ordered an audit and noticed the missing funds. He was planning to steal my grandfather's legacy to finance his escape and cover his corporate crimes. The sun began to rise, casting long, pale shadows across my office floor. The digital clock on my monitor read 6 in the morning. I calmly closed all the secure tabs meticulously, wiped my digital footprint from his server, and shut down the monitors. I felt a strange, profound sense of peace settling over my shoulders. The initial shock and heartbreak of the divorce papers were completely gone. They had been entirely consumed and replaced by the cold, hard, calculating certainty of impending warfare. I took a quick, scalding shower, meticulously flat-ironed my hair, and changed into a sharp, tailored suit. I applied my makeup with a steady hand. I walked downstairs to the kitchen, the heels of my pumps clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Darius was already there. He was dressed impeccably in his signature custom-tailored Italian suit, his tie knotted perfectly. He was casually blending a protein shake at the Marble Island, like it was just another perfectly normal Thursday morning in our happy household. He looked up as I entered, his eyes scanning my professional outfit with a toxic mixture of annoyance and superiority. He stopped the blender and leaned back, holding his shaker bottle. "You look surprisingly put together for someone whose entire life just fell apart last night," he sneered, taking a slow, arrogant sip of his shake. I ignored his childish taunt. I walked to the refrigerator and poured myself a glass of cold water. "I have several important client meetings today," I said evenly, keeping my back to him. "Some of us actually work for our money, Darius. We do not just wait for inheritances to drop into our laps." He let out a harsh, condescending laugh, setting his bottle down on the marble counter with a loud clack. "Oh, right. Your precious software career. That is exactly why we are in this unfortunate situation, Charmaine. Do not stand there and try to play the innocent victim. He took a step towards me, aggressively invading my personal space. For the last 5 years, you prioritized your CPA exams, your coding, and your little startup company over this marriage. You were always locked inside that office. You never supported my networking events. You never made an effort to be a real supportive wife to a man of my stature. You forced me to find an exit strategy because you neglected this household. He was gaslighting me with textbook terrifying precision. He actively wanted me to feel guilty. He wanted to manipulate me into believing that my ambition, my late nights working, and my financial independence were the direct reasons he had to cheat and steal. He wanted to break my spirit right now in this kitchen, so I would be docile, confused, and compliant during the upcoming divorce mediation. I turned around and looked directly at him, studying the handsome face of the man I once thought I knew so well. He was a master manipulator, a parasite wearing an expensive suit. But his cruel words held absolutely no power over me anymore. I knew about the falsified K1s. I knew about the luxury downtown penthouse. I knew about the black Amex and the embezzled funds. I possessed the digital keys to his absolute destruction. But I kept my face completely blank, offering him nothing but a calm stare. "You are right, Darius," I said, my voice eerily steady and devoid of any emotion. I was entirely focused on my career. And it is a very good thing I was. Because someone has to know how to properly read a balance sheet in this family. His jaw tightened instantly. The vein in his neck throbbed. He did not like my calm demeanor. He expected tears. He expected me to scream, to throw a glass, to beg him to reconsider the divorce. My stoicism infuriated him. He opened his mouth, drawing a deep breath, to deliver another loud, crushing insult, fully ready to escalate his emotional abuse to the next level. But before a single word could leave his mouth, a loud, aggressive banging echoed loudly through the downstairs hallway. It was not the polite, rhythmic knock of a delivery driver dropping off a package. It was the demanding, heavy-handed, entitled pounding of someone who firmly believed they owned the property. The heavy brass knocker on our custom mahogany front door slammed repeatedly against the wood, the violent sound vibrating through the quiet morning air of the house. Darius stopped. His anger vanished, replaced by a slow, predatory grin that made my skin crawl. "Ah," he said casually, checking his gold Rolex. "That must be the cleaning crew I hired. I told you last night to pack your things and move to the guest room, Charmaine. But since we are expediting this legal process, I thought it would be best if you just packed up and left the property entirely today. I need a clear space." I did not say a word. I walked past him, my heels clicking on the floor, and headed straight into the grand foyer. I did not open the door immediately. Instead, I looked out through the narrow glass sidelight window next to the doorframe. It was not a cleaning crew. Standing aggressively on my front porch, armed with large stacks of empty flattened cardboard boxes and heavy rolls of brown packing tape, were my mother-in-law Brenda, my sister-in-law Keisha, and my brother-in-law Jamal. Brenda was wearing her Sunday church hat on a Thursday, looking smug. Keisha was carrying a fake designer handbag, tapping her foot impatiently. Jamal was leaning lazily against the brick column, chewing gum. They had not come to visit. They had come to physically throw me out of my own house. Before I could even reach out to turn the deadbolt, the loud clicking sound of a metal key sliding into the lock echoed through the foyer. Darius had given his mother a spare key 3 years ago explicitly for emergencies like a burst pipe or a triggered alarm system. Apparently, my sudden forced eviction legally qualified as a family emergency. The heavy mahogany door swung inward so forcefully, I had to take a quick step backward to avoid being hit. Brenda marched into the foyer like a conquering general entering a defeated city. She did not bother to wipe her expensive shoes on the welcome mat. She dropped a massive stack of flattened cardboard boxes directly onto my pristine Persian rug. Keisha followed closely behind her, her eyes immediately darting around the expansive living room, assessing the valuables like a seasoned burglar casing a joint. Jamal brought up the rear, kicking the front door shut with his sneaker and snapping his chewing gum loudly in the quiet space. Well, do not just stand there staring like a deer in the headlights, Brenda barked aggressively, removing her silk driving gloves. You heard my son last night. You are leaving. We brought boxes to help you expedite the packing process. We want you completely out of this house by noon. I crossed my arms, feeling the cool fabric of my tailored suit jacket, and stared at the woman who had spent the last 5 years making passive-aggressive comments about my upbringing. Brenda had always deeply resented me. She came from an old money Atlanta family that had lost most of its actual wealth decades ago, leaving her with nothing but a misplaced sense of superiority and a desperate need to maintain appearances at her mega church. You are trespassing, Brenda, I said, keeping my voice remarkably even and devoid of panic. I suggest you pick up those flattened boxes and walk right back out that door before I dial 911 and call the police. Brenda let out a sharp theatrical laugh that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings of the foyer. Trespassing. In my own son's house. She took an aggressive step closer, pointing a freshly manicured finger directly at my chest. Let us get one crucial thing straight, Charmaine. Darius paid the massive mortgage on this house while you kept your nose buried in your little coding books and your CPA exams. He funded your entire comfortable lifestyle while you played pretend business owner in your home office. She leaned in, her voice dripping with venomous elitism. My son deserves every single penny of that $6 million you are selfishly trying to hoard. You were never good enough for a Morehouse man anyway. You dragged him down with your cold, robotic personality. Now that he is finally taking what is rightfully his, we are going to make sure you do not take a single valuable piece of furniture from this property. I looked past Brenda's tense shoulder, directly into the kitchen. Darius was leaning casually against the marble island, sipping his morning protein shake and watching the entire scene unfold with a look of immense twisted satisfaction. He had deliberately called them. He had orchestrated this morning invasion to break my spirit, to make me feel isolated and completely overwhelmed by a united family front. He wanted me to panic cry and leave the house voluntarily, which would give his high-priced lawyers immense leverage to claim I abandoned the marital home. It was a classic brutal psychological intimidation tactic, but intimidation only works if the target is actually afraid. While Brenda was delivering her loudly rehearsed monologue, Keisha had already bypassed the foyer and marched straight into my downstairs office space. I heard the distinct sliding sound of my custom closet door opening. I walked right past Brenda, completely ignoring her indignant gasp, and stepped calmly into the doorway of my office. Keisha was standing proudly in front of my illuminated display shelves, aggressively pulling down my collection of designer handbags. These were absolutely not gifts from Darius. I had purchased every single one of them with my own software consulting bonuses over the past 5 years. Keisha had always been intensely jealous of my wardrobe, constantly dropping heavy hints at family dinners that I should let her borrow my expensive things. Now she was simply taking them by force. She grabbed my limited edition Chanel flat bag and tossed it carelessly into one of the open cardboard boxes she had kicked onto the hardwood floor. Next went a heavy Prada tote, followed quickly by a vintage Hermes Kelly bag that I had spent 2 painstaking years authenticating and acquiring from a private dealer. What exactly do you think you are doing, Keisha? I asked, leaning my shoulder casually against the wooden doorframe. Keisha did not even have the basic decency to look guilty. She grabbed another leather bag and sneered directly at me. I am collecting collateral, Charmaine. You put my older brother through absolute hell for 5 long years. You were a terrible, highly neglectful wife. Consider these expensive bags collateral for the severe emotional damage you caused our family. Plus, Darius said all the assets in this house belong to him now anyway, so technically he is just gifting them to his favorite sister. She zipped the Prada tote open, roughly inspecting the delicate silk lining. You never even wore this one outside the house anyway, she muttered bitterly. It is completely wasted on a computer nerd like you. From the adjacent living room, I suddenly heard the loud, abrasive sound of heavy furniture scraping against the pristine hardwood floors. I turned my head sharply to see Jamal dragging my custom green velvet accent chair away from the painted wall. He had a yellow metal tape measure stretched out tightly across the pristine white drywall. Hey, Darius! Jamal yelled loudly toward the kitchen, not bothering to lower his booming voice. This wall is definitely wide enough, man. With the massive new money coming in from the divorce settlement, we can easily mount an 85-inch flat screen right here. We can finally host the proper Super Bowl viewing parties you always wanted. No more of Charmaine constantly complaining about the television volume. Darius chuckled warmly from the kitchen area. Put it on the shopping list, Jamal. We are upgrading absolutely everything in this house. The sheer unadulterated audacity of the scene playing out before my eyes was almost cinematic in its cruelty. They were actively carving up my life, my home, and my hard-earned possessions like hungry vultures picking over a fresh carcass. They had fully convinced themselves that my $12 million family inheritance was already sitting securely in Darius's personal bank account. They were joyfully spending phantom money, claiming my physical property, and treating me like an unwanted intruder in the very house I had helped design, build, and furnish. Brenda stomped up behind me, aggressively placing her hands on her wide hips. "Are you deaf, Charmaine?" she demanded loudly, her voice echoing in the hallway. "Go upstairs right now and pack your cheap clothes. My son has incredibly important business meetings today, and we are not leaving this hallway until you are completely off the premises. Do not make us pack your suitcase for you, because I promise you we will just throw everything out the second-story window directly into the driveway." The air in the house felt suffocatingly thick with their combined hostility. This was the exact calculated moment most people would completely break down. Most women would start screaming, crying uncontrollably, or begging for basic human decency. They would try to physically wrestle their belongings away from Keisha or violently push Jamal out the front door. That is exactly the reaction Darius wanted. He desperately wanted me to act erratic and hysterical so he could record it on his phone and use it as concrete evidence of my unstable mental state during the upcoming custody battle over our financial assets. I absolutely did not give them the satisfaction of a single raised decibel or a single shed tear. I took a slow, deep breath, centering my mind in the absolute certainty of the total financial destruction I was about to unleash upon every single person standing in this room. I reached into the tailored pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. I swiped the illuminated screen, opening the high-definition camera application, and switched it seamlessly to video recording mode. I pressed the red button. I lifted the phone, holding my arm incredibly steady, and framed Keisha perfectly in the center of the digital screen. She was just reaching upward for a large Louis Vuitton weekender bag resting on the very top shelf. "Smile for the camera, Keisha," I said, my voice projecting clearly and calmly over the chaotic noise of the house. Keisha froze instantly, her hand resting rigidly on the leather handle of the bag. She turned around slowly, her eyes widening slightly in panic as she saw the bright red recording light blinking steadily on my phone screen. "What are you doing?" she snapped, trying desperately to sound tough, but a slight noticeable tremor betrayed her sudden underlying nervousness. "Put that phone away, Charmaine. You absolutely cannot record me inside this house without my explicit permission." "Actually, Keisha, I can," I replied smoothly, keeping the camera lens focused right on her tense face. The state of Georgia is a one-party consent state for video and audio recording, but more importantly, I need this high-definition footage for the official police report I'm about to file. Brenda scoffed loudly and obnoxiously from the hallway. "Police report? Do not be utterly ridiculous. You have absolutely no legal grounds to call the police on us. This is merely a private family dispute over shared marital property." I slowly panned the camera away from Keisha, carefully capturing the open cardboard boxes filled to the brim with my expensive handbags, and then moved it steadily over to capture Jamal standing awkwardly in the living room with his extended tape measure. I finally panned the camera directly to Brenda's angry, flushed face. It officially stopped being a private family dispute the exact second she started throwing my separately purchased, individually receipted personal property into a box to steal it. I explained, my tone resembling a patient professor lecturing a particularly slow and stubborn class. "Those specific bags retail for a combined total of over $40,000. Do you actively know the law, Keisha?" In the state of Georgia, taking property valued at over $500 without the rightful owner's explicit consent is no longer considered a simple misdemeanor. I paused intentionally, letting the heavy silence stretch out for a dramatic second before delivering the final legal blow. Grand theft is a severe felony in Georgia. Keisha snatched her hand away from the Louis Vuitton bag, as if the premium leather had suddenly caught on fire. She took a quick, stumbling step backward, looking frantically toward the kitchen area for her older brother to intervene and save her. "It is not theft!" Keisha yelled defensively, her voice pitching up a full octave in sheer panic. "Darius told me I could have them today. This is marital property." I kept the camera rolling smoothly, zooming in slightly on her deeply panicked expression. "Darius does not legally own my personal accessories, Keisha. And even if he magically did, a family court judge has not finalized the division of our assets yet. Which legally means you broke into my home and are actively bagging up luxury goods to remove them from the premises without proper court authorization. That specific action carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 1 to 10 years in a state penitentiary. I possess the original purchase receipts, the registered serial numbers, and right now I have a beautiful crystal clear video of you actively committing the crime." Jamal slowly let the yellow tape measure retract into its plastic casing with a loud depressing zip. He suddenly looked incredibly uncomfortable standing in the middle of the spacious living room. "Hey man," he called out nervously to the kitchen, his previous bravado entirely gone. "You confidently said this was legally cleared. You did not say anything about catching felonies today." Brenda's wrinkled face flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson red. She lunged forward aggressively, reaching out to slap the recording phone right out of my hand. "Turn that off right now, you insolent little girl." I easily sidestepped her clumsy, slow attempt, keeping the phone completely stable in my grip. "That is officially an assault captured on camera, Brenda," I noted dryly. "Please keep going. You are making my protective order application incredibly easy to fill out this morning." Darius finally pushed aggressively off the marble island and walked briskly out of the kitchen, his carefully crafted mask of smug amusement completely shattered into pieces. He suddenly realized the entire situation was rapidly spiraling completely out of his control. His family was supposed to mentally intimidate me, but instead, I was systematically documenting them committing federal and state crimes inside my living room. "Put the phone down!" Charmaine Darius demanded loudly, using his deepest, most authoritative broker voice. "You are being completely unreasonable and hysterical." I slowly lowered the phone, but I absolutely did not stop the recording. I looked Darius dead in the eye, my expression completely blank. "I am being perfectly reasonable, Darius. Your family has exactly 60 seconds to drop my personal belongings, take their empty cardboard boxes, and walk out of my front door. If they are not entirely off this property by the time my watch hits the minute mark, I am sending this video file directly to the Atlanta Police Department Burglary Division, and then I am sending a copy to my attorney." Keisha stared at me, her chest heaving with a chaotic mix of fury and genuine fear. The digital numbers on my smartwatch ticked down ruthlessly. 45 seconds, I announced, my voice cutting cleanly through the heavy, toxic silence of the living room. Keisha let out a deeply frustrated guttural scream. She forcefully dropped the Louis Vuitton weekender bag. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy, satisfying thud. But instead of backing away and accepting defeat, she stepped aggressively into my personal space, closing the distance between us until I could smell the cheap vanilla perfume she bathed in. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Charmaine," she hissed, her hands balling into tight fists at her sides. She raised her right hand, slightly twitching as if she might actually try to strike me across the face. "You think your money makes you better than us. You are nothing but a cold, calculating machine who never knew how to love my brother." Before she could do anything foolish enough to warrant an immediate felony arrest on camera, Darius finally intervened. He stepped quickly between us, placing a firm, controlling hand on his sister's shoulder and pushing her back slightly. He was masterfully playing the role of the reasonable peacemaker, a calculated performance designed to make me look like the erratic instigator if anyone ever watched the footage. "Enough," Keisha, Darius commanded, though his tone lacked any real anger toward her. He turned to face me, casually adjusting the knot of his expensive silk tie, as if we were discussing a minor scheduling conflict. Look at what you are doing to this family, Charmaine. You are intentionally escalating a simple transition into a highly hostile environment. It is best if you just leave right now. You are clearly not in a rational state of mind, and your presence is just causing unnecessary trauma for everyone. I kept the phone recording, my arm perfectly steady, my expression completely flat. I am perfectly rational, Darius. I am just strictly enforcing the law in my own home. It is not your home anymore, Darius shot back, his voice dropping into a low, intensely condescending register. Let me remind you of a very important legal fact. The deed to this property is solely in my name. I bought this house before we got married. I pay the primary mortgage every single month from my corporate accounts. Your name is nowhere on the primary title. So do us all a massive favor, pack a small bag and get out of my house. I will see you in mediation next week, and we can let the lawyers sort out the rest of your little temper tantrum. 55 seconds, I replied calmly, ignoring his entire monologue. Brenda grabbed Keisha's arm, her face twisted in bitter disgust. Come on, Keisha. Let the bitter woman pack her cheap clothes. We will come back tomorrow when the house is finally clean and she is permanently gone. They practically stomped out of the living room, Jamal trailing closely behind them like a scolded dog, entirely forgetting his measuring tape on the floor. The heavy mahogany front door slammed shut behind them, vibrating the expensive artwork hanging on the walls. Darius looked at me, a victorious, arrogant smirk playing on his lips. I will give you exactly 30 minutes to pack your things, he said smoothly before turning his back on me and walking into the kitchen to finish his protein shake. I did not argue with him. I did not fight for the house. Most women in my position would have planted their feet, called their attorneys screaming, and fiercely refused to leave the marital home. But I was not most women, and I certainly was not thinking emotionally. I was thinking like a forensic accountant. I knew a critical piece of financial information that Darius and his arrogant mother did not. Darius genuinely thought having his name on the deed made him the undisputed king of the castle. He completely forgot that the person who holds the mortgage is the one who truly owns the property. And thanks to my late-night digital audit, I knew exactly what kind of toxic, fraudulent debt was buried deep inside the walls of this custom-built home. I walked upstairs to the master's suite for the final time. I pulled a single hard-shell suitcase from the back of the massive walk-in closet. I did not pack the designer bags Keisha had tried to steal, the expensive diamond jewelry, or the custom-tailored gowns Darius had bought me for his endless corporate galas. Those items were nothing but shiny distractions meant to keep me compliant. I packed my essential professional work clothes, my backup encrypted hard drives, and the original physical copies of my grandfather's trust documents. Grandpa Elias had taught me a very important lesson about real estate when I was just a teenager. Never fall in love with a building, Charmaine, he had said, pointing at a dilapidated storefront he had just purchased. Wood and brick have no soul. You only fight for an asset if it holds actual value. If it is a liability, you smile and hand the keys to the biggest fool in the room. As I zipped the suitcase closed, I looked around the sprawling bedroom. The king-sized bed, the imported Italian linens, the massive crystal chandelier hanging from the tray ceiling, it all looked incredibly hollow to me now. This house was never a home. It was a carefully constructed stage set for Darius to play the role of a highly successful Atlanta broker. Leaving it behind did not feel like a defeat. It felt like shedding a heavy, suffocating weight. I was handing the keys to the biggest fool in the room. I rolled the suitcase down the curved staircase. The wheels bumped softly and rhythmically against the plush carpet runner. Darius was standing in the grand foyer checking his gold watch, clearly eager to see me physically walk out the door so he could officially claim his absolute victory. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked past him. Through the narrow glass sidelight of the front door, I could clearly see Brenda, Keisha, and Jamal lingering aggressively in the driveway. They were huddled around Keisha's pristine white Range Rover, glaring at the house and waiting to watch my humiliating exit. I gripped the handle of my suitcase and walked toward the door. Darius stepped aside, a smug, deeply satisfied expression plastered across his handsome face. "Goodbye, Charmaine," he said smoothly, Try not to ruin the guest towels at whatever cheap hotel you end up checking into. I opened the heavy mahogany door and stepped out onto the front porch. The warm Atlanta morning air hit my face, carrying the sweet scent of blooming magnolias. I walked down the brick steps, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. I did not look back at the house. I walked straight toward my own car, a modest but highly reliable sedan that I owned free and clear. As I approached my vehicle, I paused. Keisha was leaning against the polished hood of her Range Rover, glaring at me with unrestrained hatred. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully helped her brother push me out of the family and secure her own financial future. I turned to face her, a cool, polite smile spreading across my lips. "Keisha," I called out, my voice carrying easily across the manicured driveway. She crossed her arms, raising her chin defensively. "What do you want now? Are you finally going to apologize for threatening your own family?" I shook my head slowly, maintaining my pleasant smile. "No. I just wanted to give you a helpful piece of financial advice before I leave. That beautiful white Range Rover you are leaning against. Your monthly lease payment is exactly 60 days past due. The legal grace period expired at midnight last night." Keisha's defensive posture completely vanished. Her arms dropped limply to her sides, and her eyes darted nervously toward her mother. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice entirely lacking its usual aggressive edge. "My car payment is totally fine. Darius handles the corporate lease payments for me through his brokerage firm." I smiled wider, genuinely enjoying the sudden sharp spike of panic radiating from her. "Well, you might want to check your email, Keisha, specifically your spam folder. The commercial financing company sent the final default notice yesterday afternoon. You should probably avoid parking on public streets for the next few days. The repo trucks in Atlanta are incredibly efficient this time of year, and they do not care who your brother is." I did not wait for her to respond. I did not stick around to watch the profound confusion and rising terror wash over her face as she scrambled for her phone. I opened my car door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. I backed smoothly out of the driveway, leaving my toxic in-laws standing in the Georgia heat, suddenly realizing that their supposed financial safety net was already beginning to unravel. I drove straight to the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Atlanta. I did not care about the exorbitant daily rate. I needed a secure, highly controlled environment with high-speed fiber optic internet and absolute privacy. The concierge recognized me immediately from previous corporate tech conferences and seamlessly upgraded me to a sprawling corner suite on the executive floor. The moment the heavy suite door clicked shut behind me, the luxurious surroundings faded away. I went straight to work. I pushed the expensive room service menu aside and completely transformed the massive glass dining table into a highly functional mobile command center. I unpacked my encrypted laptops, linking them together with specialized cables to create a seamless dual-monitor setup. The screens illuminated the quiet room with fast-flowing streams of raw financial data, routing numbers and shell company registries. I pulled up the exact GPS coordinates of the luxury penthouse I had discovered on Darius's hidden black Amex statement earlier that morning. The property was located just 4 blocks away from my hotel, right in the beating heart of the financial district. I cross-referenced the building's property management company with my own corporate database. I knew their exact security protocols. I knew the concierge shift changes. I knew exactly how to bypass the front desk without raising a single alarm. Darius genuinely thought he had smoothly eliminated me from his life this morning. He thought he could pack me into a box and throw me away while he prepared to steal my inheritance in family court. He had absolutely no idea that I was already inside his digital walls, tracking his every move and systematically dismantling his empire piece by piece. I closed my primary laptop and stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored suit jacket. It was time to stop reading bank statements and start confronting the physical reality of his double life. I grabbed my hotel keycard and headed for the door. I was going to visit the downtown penthouse, and I was going to finally meet the woman who was helping my husband steal my future. As I walked down the quiet carpeted hallway of the hotel toward the elevator, my mind was rapidly organizing the financial data I had just extracted from the encrypted servers. While setting up my mobile command center, I had dug deeply into the specific limited liability company that officially owned the downtown penthouse. The deed was registered to an entity called Apex Horizon LLC. To an average person, or even a lazy divorce attorney, it would look like a standard corporate holding company completely unrelated to my husband. But my specialized auditing software had easily pierced the corporate veil. Apex Horizon was a hollow shell company registered in Delaware. It had no employees, no actual clients, and absolutely no legitimate business operations. Its sole purpose was to receive the stolen funds Darius was secretly funneling out of his own brokerage firm. He had been quietly embezzling his partner's money, hiding it behind fake marketing invoices, and using it to finance a multi-million-dollar love nest. I stepped into the hotel elevator and pressed the button for the parking garage. The sheer arrogance of his plan was almost impressive in its stupidity. He was simultaneously robbing his business partners and trying to steal my family inheritance, all while treating me like an incompetent housewife who could be easily bullied into submission. I navigated my car out of the hotel garage and merged into the heavy midday Atlanta traffic. The drive to the financial district gave me time to mentally prepare for the physical confrontation ahead. I was not driving there to scream, throw things, or cause a chaotic public scene. I was conducting an on-site forensic investigation. I needed to see the physical layout of his hidden life, and more importantly, I needed to identify the co-conspirator who was helping him launder the stolen money. The penthouse was located in one of the most exclusive, hyper-secure residential glass towers in downtown Atlanta. These types of ultra-luxury buildings are specifically designed to keep angry spouses and unwanted visitors completely locked out. The main lobby was heavily guarded by a sophisticated security desk, a strict guest registry, and 24-hour concierge staff. Furthermore, the passenger elevators required a programmed biometric key fob just to access the residential floors. A direct frontal approach through the main lobby would be immediately stopped by security, giving Darius ample time to hide his guest and fabricate a lie. Fortunately, my career as a forensic accountant required me to frequently audit highly secure commercial facilities, corporate vaults, and restricted data centers. I knew exactly how the hidden infrastructure of these massive buildings actually worked. Security is always an illusion designed to intimidate the general public. The weakest link in any multi-million-dollar high-rise is never the front door. It is always the service entrance. I bypassed the glamorous main entrance entirely and drove my car around to the narrow alleyway behind the building. I parked in a loading zone next to a row of industrial dumpsters. I grabbed a plain manila folder from my back seat, slipped a pen behind my ear, and walked purposefully toward the underground loading dock. The delivery bay was buzzing with chaotic activity. Catering staff, furniture delivery men, and maintenance workers were rushing back and forth. I kept my face locked in an expression of severe, annoyed corporate authority. I walked right past the loading dock supervisor without breaking my stride, acting as if I owned the entire building. When you look incredibly impatient, dressed in a sharp tailored suit, and hold a folder as if it contains highly important compliance documents, working-class people instinctively step out of your way. Nobody wants to be the person who delays an aggressive corporate inspector. A delivery worker wearing a florist uniform walked up to the heavy steel door leading to the service elevators. He swiped his magnetic access badge. The light blinked green and the heavy door clicked open. I stepped up right behind him, let out a loud, frustrated sigh, and smoothly caught the door before it could close. I gave him a quick, dismissive nod and stepped into the service corridor. I bypassed the lower floors entirely and located the dedicated freight elevator. This specific elevator was utilized exclusively by the housekeeping staff and private contractors, meaning it completely bypassed the biometric security checkpoints of the main passenger cabs. I pressed the button for the top floor. The industrial metal box hummed loudly as it carried me 30 stories up into the Atlanta skyline. When the elevator doors finally slid open, I stepped out into a quiet, pristine, heavily carpeted residential hallway. The air up here smelled distinctly of expensive bergamot room spray and fresh lilies. There were only two massive double doors on this entire floor. Penthouse A and Penthouse B. My hacked financial records clearly indicated Darius was leasing Penthouse A. I walked silently down the long hallway, my leather heels sinking deeply into the plush carpeting, completely muffling my footsteps. As I approached the grand double doors of Penthouse A, I noticed a stroke of incredible luck. The heavy wooden door was pushed slightly ajar. A heavy brass doorstop was wedged firmly underneath it. A large specialized housekeeping cart was parked a few yards down the hallway, completely unattended. The private cleaning staff had likely propped the door open while taking the trash down to the service disposal chute, leaving the multi-million-dollar fortress entirely unsecured for a few brief minutes. I stopped just outside the crack in the door. I did not need to knock. I could already hear the clear, distinct sound of a cork popping loudly from a champagne bottle, followed immediately by the bright ringing sound of crystal flutes clinking together in celebration. Then I heard Darius laugh. It was not his professional networking laugh. It was a deep, arrogant, deeply satisfied sound. "We did it," Darius said, his voice carrying easily into the quiet hallway. "She is officially out of the house. I had my mother and Keisha go over there this morning with packing boxes to pressure her. She totally folded. She packed a single suitcase and literally ran away to a hotel. My lawyer said her abandoning the marital home gives us massive leverage for the temporary injunction hearing tomorrow." A woman laughed softly in response. Her voice was smooth, sophisticated, and entirely unbothered by the fact that she was actively helping a man destroy his marriage. "I told you she was weak," the woman replied confidently. "She might be a genius with her little software codes, Darius, but she has absolutely no spine in the real world. Did she suspect anything about us?" "Not a single thing," Darius scoffed loudly, pouring more champagne. "She was too busy acting morally superior to realize I have been moving the firm's money into this penthouse for 2 years. She actually believes this is just a standard divorce over irreconcilable differences. She completely bought the commingled funds trap, too. By Friday afternoon, her entire $12 million inheritance will be completely frozen by the family court. We will have all the leverage we need to force a quick, highly profitable settlement." I stood perfectly still in the hallway, letting their vile, arrogant words wash over me. They were actively celebrating my demise. They were drinking expensive champagne, fully believing they had successfully outsmarted me and secured their lavish future with my grandfather's hard-earned money. I placed my hand flat against the heavy wooden door and pushed it open smoothly. I stepped into the grand entryway. The penthouse was absolutely breathtaking, featuring massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows that offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the entire Atlanta skyline. Modern abstract art hung on the pristine white walls, and a massive custom marble fireplace anchored the sprawling living room. Darius was standing by a long marble wet bar, wearing a tailored navy suit, without the tie, holding a bottle of Dom Perignon. The woman was lounging casually on a massive curved white leather sofa. She was wearing an expensive emerald green silk robe, holding her crystal champagne flute delicately between her manicured fingers. They did not hear me enter over the ambient sound of the soft jazz music playing through the hidden ceiling speakers. I walked slowly across the wide plank hardwood floor until I was standing directly in the center of the expansive living room, perfectly framed by the spectacular view of the city. "You really should tell your cleaning staff to close the door when they take out the trash." "Darius," I said, my voice cutting through the jazz music like a sharp blade of ice. "It is a major security risk for someone with so much to lose." Darius violently dropped the champagne bottle. It slammed onto the marble counter, incredibly close to shattering, the expensive liquid foaming and spilling over the edge. He spun around, his eyes widening in sheer unadulterated panic as he stared at me standing in his hidden sanctuary. His jaw actually dropped open, entirely incapable of forming a single coherent word. The woman on the couch gasped loudly and sat up straight, spilling a splash of champagne onto her expensive silk robe. I slowly turned my attention away from my terrified husband and looked directly at his mistress. I expected to see a random cocktail waitress, a desperate real estate assistant, or perhaps a wealthy client he had manipulated. But as I studied her perfectly contoured face and her sharp, intelligent eyes, a cold jolt of absolute recognition hit me. I knew her. I did not know her intimately, but I had definitely sat across a mahogany conference table from her precisely 1 month ago. The pieces of the financial puzzle slammed together in my mind with terrifying speed and clarity. Her name was Chloe Williams. Chloe was not just some random woman Darius had picked up at a networking event to fund his ego. She was a highly respected, heavily credentialed commercial property appraiser working for one of the most prestigious valuation firms in the state of Georgia. But that was not the piece of information that made my blood run absolutely cold. A month ago, my grandfather's estate lawyer had formally hired an independent third-party valuation expert to officially assess the exact market value of Grandpa Elias's extensive commercial real estate portfolio for the upcoming probate process. The woman sitting on the couch sipping champagne in my husband's secret penthouse was the exact same appraiser assigned to value my $12 million inheritance. My shock at recognizing her was intense, but while my mind instantly began calculating the severe legal ramifications of this massive conflict of interest, Chloe simply smiled. The initial surprise on her face melted away, replaced by a slow, venomous smirk. She did not scramble to cover herself. She did not look ashamed. She casually set her crystal champagne flute down on the glass coffee table and crossed her long legs, adjusting her emerald green silk robe with deliberate performative slowness. Darius, however, was still struggling to catch his breath. He looked frantically from me to the open double doors behind me, clearly expecting a team of aggressive divorce lawyers or a private investigator with a camera to come storming into the apartment. When nobody else appeared, he took a shaky breath, running his hand nervously over his face. He wiped the spilled champagne off his expensive tailored suit pants and stood up straighter. For a long moment, the room was completely silent, save for the soft jazz still playing from the hidden ceiling speakers. I did not scream. I did not grab the nearest heavy object to throw at his head. I did not launch into a tearful, hysterical tirade about broken vows and wasted years. I just stood there, my hands resting calmly at my sides, my posture perfectly straight, my face an entirely unreadable mask. My terrifying calm seemed to thoroughly unnerve him at first, but then his natural, deeply ingrained arrogance took over. He looked at me standing alone in his multi-million-dollar secret apartment, and his panic quickly morphed back into the smug, patronizing confidence I had seen in the kitchen that morning. He actually threw his head back and let out a loud, mocking laugh. "You really are something else," Charmaine Darius said, shaking his head in amusement as he picked up his champagne glass. "Tracking me down to the penthouse. Did you hire a private investigator, or did you just get lucky looking over my shoulder at my phone? It does not matter. You being here changes absolutely nothing. In fact, it just saves me the trouble of explaining things to you later." He walked over to the curved leather couch and stood beside Chloe, placing a highly possessive hand on her bare shoulder. She leaned into his touch, staring at me with a look of utter superiority. "Since you decided to crash our private celebration," Darius continued, gesturing expansively around the luxurious, sunlit room, "let me formally introduce you to my future business partner. Chloe and I are starting our own boutique commercial real estate brokerage. We are leaving the aging dinosaurs at my current firm completely behind. We are taking the top-tier clients, the best commercial listings, and we are going to completely dominate the Atlanta market." I maintained my silence, letting him talk freely. When arrogant men believe they have definitively won, they cannot resist the overwhelming urge to explain exactly how clever they are. They freely confess to absolutely everything because they truly believe there are no consequences left to face. "Setting up a high-end boutique firm requires a massive amount of liquid capital," Darius explained, taking a confident sip of his expensive drink. "You need prime downtown office space, aggressive marketing budgets, expensive legal retainers, and enough cash flow to comfortably survive the first year of operations. We needed seed money, a lot of it. And frankly, my current business partners are far too cheap to buy me out at my actual worth. So I had to look for funding elsewhere." He paused, his eyes gleaming with malicious, calculated delight. "That is exactly where you come in, my brilliant wife. When your grandfather passed away and left you that $12 million trust, it was like the universe finally handed me the winning lottery ticket I deserved for enduring 5 long years of our incredibly boring marriage. That $100,000 check you deposited into our joint account sealed the deal perfectly. By next week, the family court judge will freeze the entire trust. In mediation, I will demand half. $6 million. That is my seed money, Charmaine. You are going to fully fund my new empire, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. It was a stunning brazen admission of premeditated financial abuse. He was not just leaving me for another woman. He was actively utilizing the legal system to hostage my family legacy, to finance his infidelity and his professional ambition. Chloe let out a soft, mocking sigh, clearly bored by his lengthy explanation. She picked up her glass and took a sip, her eyes locked securely onto mine. You know, Darius told me you were supposed to be this brilliant, highly observant forensic accountant. She purred, her voice dripping with condescension. He said you were an absolute genius with financial software and auditing corporate accounts. But honestly, looking at you right now, I am incredibly underwhelmed. She stood up from the couch, the silk robe pooling luxuriously around her ankles. She walked slowly toward me, stopping just a few feet away, intentionally invading my personal space to assert her dominance in the room. You are an accountant, Charmaine. She mocked, a cruel smile twisting her perfect lips. Yet you completely missed the fact that your husband has been secretly transferring $500,000 of his firm's operational capital directly into my private offshore accounts over the past 2 years. $500,000 carefully structured in monthly retainer fees for phantom appraisal consultations. And you, the great financial detective, never noticed a single missing dime. You shared a bed with this man, you filed his taxes every year, and you never saw it coming. You really are blind. She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed loudly in the spacious room. You are so obsessed with your spreadsheets and your little corporate clients that you missed the biggest fraud happening right under your own roof. You lost your husband, you lost your house this morning, and by next week you are going to lose your grandfather's money. It is almost sad how easy you were to manipulate. I listened to her toxic monologue with absolute unbreakable composure. Every word she spoke was another heavy nail in her own coffin. She had just verbally confessed to receiving embezzled funds, participating in corporate wire fraud, and actively conspiring to defraud a marital estate. She was so blinded by her own ego that she did not realize she was eagerly bragging about committing federal crimes to a woman who built her entire career on sending white-collar criminals to federal prison. I did not argue with her. I did not defend my professional skills. I did not point out that I had in fact discovered their entire scheme just a few hours ago. Engaging in a shouting match with a fool only makes you look foolish. Instead, my eyes calmly bypassed her mocking face and scanned the massive glass coffee table sitting in the center of the living room. It was covered with half-empty champagne glasses, a scattered deck of playing cards, and a sleek silver laptop. But right next to the laptop, sitting out in the open for anyone to see, was a thick stack of official legal documents printed on heavy cardstock. The bold black font at the very top of the title page caught my attention instantly. It read, Official Property Valuation and Appraisal Report. Right beneath that, the subject of the appraisal was listed in large letters. Elias Holdings, LLC. The Commercial Real Estate Portfolio of Theodore Elias. My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs, but my face remained perfectly blank. The sheer audacity of their plan was finally coming into crystal clear focus. Chloe was not just helping Darius steal $6 million from my inheritance. As the officially appointed independent appraiser for the probate court, she had direct, unchecked control over how much my grandfather's properties were actually worth on paper. I realized instantly what they were planning to do. They were not just going to take half the money. Chloe was going to drastically undervalue the prime commercial real estate in my grandfather's portfolio. She would submit a fraudulent appraisal to the court, claiming the buildings were worth millions of dollars less than their actual market value. Then Darius would use his new boutique brokerage and his stolen seed money to quietly buy up those deeply discounted properties through anonymous shell companies before I even knew what happened. They were planning to flip my grandfather's entire life work for triple the profit. It was not just a messy divorce anymore. It was a highly orchestrated multi-million-dollar racketeering enterprise. And the primary evidence was sitting right there on the coffee table. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, entirely ignoring Chloe, who instinctively took a step back, startled by my sudden movement. I walked smoothly over to the glass table. Darius tensed up, taking a step forward as if he thought I was going to flip the table or smash his laptop. I did neither. I calmly reached into my tailored suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the high-definition camera application, held it directly over the thick stack of appraisal documents, and pressed the capture button. The artificial shutter sound clicked loudly in the quiet room. "Hey!" Darius shouted, his voice cracking slightly with a sudden spike of alarm. "What are you doing? Put that phone away right now! You cannot take pictures of confidential client files." I ignored him, tapping the screen to ensure the high-resolution image was perfectly in focus, clearly showing the title of the document, and Chloe's official appraiser seal stamped at the bottom of the page. I synced the photo immediately to my encrypted cloud server. The evidence was entirely secured. I slowly turned around to face them. Darius was glaring at me, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Chloe had lost her confident smirk entirely. She was staring at the phone in my hand, a flicker of genuine uncertainty finally crossing her eyes. They both realized simultaneously that I was not reacting the way a broken, defeated woman was supposed to react. I slipped the phone back into my jacket pocket and offered Chloe a small, chilling smile. "You are right, Chloe," I said, my voice eerily calm and steady in the silent room. "I did miss something. I was so focused on the money that I completely missed the conflict of interest. But do not worry." I walked past her, heading straight for the grand double doors, leaving them standing in their stolen luxury apartment. I see it now. I walked out of the double doors, leaving them frozen in their stolen sanctuary. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut firmly behind me, abruptly cutting off the soft jazz music and sealing Darius and Chloe inside their own rising panic. I did not run down the quiet residential hallway. I did not nervously look over my shoulder to see if he was following me. I maintained the exact same measured professional pace I used when exiting a corporate boardroom after delivering a devastating audit report to a corrupt board of directors. I took the service elevator back down to the loading dock, walked smoothly past the busy catering crews, and got into my car. The midday Atlanta sun was beating down on the pavement, but inside my vehicle the air conditioning was blasting perfectly, matching the absolute ice running through my veins. I drove the 4 blocks back to the Ritz-Carlton in complete silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the rhythmic hum of my engine and the rapid firing of my own analytical neurons. Darius thought he was playing a game of emotional warfare, trying to break me down this morning with his mother and sister. But he had fundamentally misunderstood the battlefield. We were not fighting over hurt feelings or a failed marriage. We were fighting a high-stakes war of numbers, and he had just unknowingly handed me the nuclear launch codes. I walked into my executive suite, locked the heavy deadbolt, and dropped my suit jacket onto the nearest velvet armchair. I sat down at the glass dining table, my dual monitors waking up instantly. I connected my smartphone to the encrypted server and pulled up the high-resolution photograph I had just taken of Chloe's official appraisal document. I dragged the image file onto the massive 32-inch primary monitor and zoomed in tightly on the columns of printed numbers. As a forensic accountant, I did not just read numbers, I interrogated them. I looked for the story they were desperately trying to hide. And the story Chloe had written on these official legal documents was an absolute masterpiece of financial fiction. I opened a second secure window and pulled up the actual municipal tax records, historical cash flow statements, and recent commercial sales comparables for the West End district. Grandpa Elias owned a massive, fully renovated commercial strip center right in the heart of that neighborhood. It was a prime piece of real estate, fully leased to stable long-term corporate tenants with zero vacancy. According to standard objective market valuation, that single property was worth a highly conservative $4.5 million. I looked back at Chloe's official appraisal report. She had listed the market value of the West End Strip Center at a laughable $1.8 million. I felt a cold, sharp smile slowly spread across my face. She had not just undervalued it slightly to save the estate on property taxes. She had slashed the actual value by nearly 60%. I quickly scanned the rest of the commercial portfolio listed on the document. The downtown office building, the two sprawling logistics warehouses near the airport, the highly coveted vacant commercial lots in Midtown. Every single asset had been aggressively purposefully undervalued by at least 40%. The total commercial portfolio, which Grandpa Elias and his expert financial advisors had accurately valued at $12 million just last year, was listed on Chloe's official court submission at a meager $6.8 million. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, interlacing my fingers, as the sheer, breathtaking scope of their criminal conspiracy unfolded perfectly in my mind. This was not a sudden crime of passion. This was a highly sophisticated, meticulously planned corporate heist. If Darius had simply filed for divorce and demanded his share of a $12 million estate, the family court judge would have ordered a standard lengthy division of assets. But by bringing in his secret mistress as the officially court-appointed appraiser, he was rigging the entire legal game from the inside. Here was their exact play. Next week in family court, Darius and his high-priced lawyers would aggressively present Chloe's fraudulent appraisal to the judge. They would claim that the entire marital estate was only worth $6.8 million. Because the assets were primarily tied up in physical real estate and not liquid cash, Darius would legally demand that the properties be liquidated immediately so he could receive his 50% share of the assets. A forced liquidation in family court usually means the properties go up for public auction or a highly expedited quick sale. And who would magically appear to buy these deeply discounted commercial buildings? Apex Horizon LLC, the hidden Delaware shell company fully controlled by Darius and Chloe. They would use the $500,000 Darius had already embezzled from his brokerage firm as the down payment to secure the commercial loans. They would buy my grandfather's entire legacy for absolute pennies on the dollar. Once the ink was dry and the divorce was officially finalized, they would immediately turn around and relist the exact same properties on the open commercial market for their true actual value of $12 million. They were planning to pocket the massive difference. They would walk away with millions in clean, fully laundered cash, while I would be left with a tiny fraction of my rightful inheritance, completely oblivious to the fact that I had just been legally robbed blind by my own husband. It was brilliant, it was ruthless, and it was completely undeniably illegal. This scheme crossed multiple federal jurisdictions. Falsifying an official real estate appraisal to defraud a marital estate and actively manipulate a court proceeding is a severe felony. Using interstate bank wires to move embezzled corporate funds to a hidden shell company constitutes federal wire fraud. Conspiring together to successfully execute this complex financial crime elevated the entire situation directly into the realm of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. This was a textbook RICO case. Darius genuinely thought he was dealing with a heartbroken, naive wife in family court. He had absolutely no idea he was about to face the devastating, relentless wrath of the federal government. I picked up my smartphone and opened my encrypted contact list. I scrolled right past the numbers for my software clients and my local divorce attorney. I stopped on a specific name, Marcus Sterling. Mr. Sterling was not a family law attorney. He did not handle messy divorces or petty child custody battles. He was Grandpa Elias's personal estate lawyer and chief corporate counsel. He was an old-school, razor-sharp, incredibly ruthless legal shark who had spent 40 years aggressively defending my grandfather's empire from greedy developers and corrupt city officials. He did not tolerate fools, and he absolutely destroyed thieves. I pressed call. The secure line rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. Sterling Law. Speak. Mr. Sterling, it is Charmaine. There was a brief pause on the line. Charmaine. I am deeply sorry about the circumstances. I heard about the divorce petition this morning. I already have a litigation team reviewing the trust documents to ensure your husband cannot pierce the corporate veil. We are preparing to file multiple defensive motions by tomorrow morning to completely block his injunction. We will bury his Atlanta lawyers in paperwork until they suffocate. I stared intensely at the fraudulent appraisal document glowing brightly on my monitor. "Stop the filings," I said evenly. Another pause, much longer this time. "Excuse me. If we do not file the defensive motions, the family court judge will grant his injunction automatically. Your grandfather's entire portfolio will be frozen. Your husband will be granted a mediation hearing to formally demand his 50% share. We cannot allow him to establish that legal foothold. I do not want to block him, Mr. Sterling. I want to invite him in." I quickly and precisely explained absolutely everything I had uncovered over the last 12 hours. I told him about the hidden commingled funds trap Darius had orchestrated 3 months ago. I detailed the offshore accounts, the embezzled firm money, and the luxurious hidden downtown penthouse. And then I dropped the final devastating piece of the puzzle. I told him about Chloe Williams, the massive conflict of interest, and the aggressive 40% undervaluation printed clearly on the official appraisal report I had just photographed. I listened to the heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in Mr. Sterling's brilliant, ruthless legal mind. He was a man who truly loved a good legal fight, but he loved a flawless execution even more. "They are attempting to use the family court to facilitate a multi-million-dollar racketeering scheme," Mr. Sterling finally said, his gravelly voice dropping an octave, practically vibrating with barely contained legal fury. "Theodore would have skinned him alive for trying to steal these buildings." "Grandpa is not here to do it," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. "So I am going to do it for him. But we cannot alert them too early. If we file defensive motions now, Darius will know we are on to him. He will panic. He will destroy the digital evidence, dissolve the shell companies, and Chloe will miraculously revise her appraisal due to a sudden clerical error. They will slip right through our fingers and only face a messy divorce. I do not want a divorce settlement. I want federal indictments." "What is your exact instruction, Charmaine?" Mr. Sterling asked, his tone rapidly shifting from protective family lawyer to a general receiving battle orders. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on the digital evidence of my husband's absolute betrayal. "Do not file the defensive motions. Let Darius walk into mediation thinking he has won. I want him to bleed out at the table." Exactly 5 days later, I walked into the sprawling marble lobby of one of the most expensive family law firms in the Buckhead district of Atlanta. The air conditioning was turned up uncomfortably high, and the entire space was a monument to billable hours decorated in cold glass polished chrome and abstract modern art that looked as intimidating as the hourly rates. I was wearing a sharp charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back into a severe bun, carrying nothing but a slim black leather briefcase. I arrived exactly 20 minutes early to ensure I had ample time to observe the battlefield before the actual war began. I walked past the towering reception desk and immediately spotted my mother-in-law sitting in the opulent waiting area. Brenda was slouched comfortably in a plush leather armchair, completely engrossed in her large smartphone screen. She was scrolling rapidly, and as I walked closer, I could clearly see the vibrant images of overwater bungalows in Bora Bora and first-class flight itineraries reflecting in her designer sunglasses. She was already actively shopping for luxury vacations, gleefully spending the massive settlement check she firmly believed her son was going to extract from me today. Brenda looked up as my heels clicked sharply against the polished marble floor. She lowered her phone and offered me a wide, predatory smile that did absolutely nothing to hide the malice in her eyes. "Well, look who decided to show up," she sneered, her voice carrying loudly across the quiet reception area. "I was beginning to wonder if you were going to default and just let the judge award Darius everything. I hope you brought your checkbook, Charmaine. Darius has already picked out the custom cabinets for his new kitchen." I did not break my stride. I did not offer her a polite greeting or engage with her petty taunts. "Enjoy your travel brochures, Brenda," I said evenly, walking straight past her toward the designated conference rooms. "I hear federal prison does not offer very good tropical excursions." She scoffed loudly behind me, completely missing the grave warning in my words, dismissing it as the bitter rambling of a defeated woman. I entered the large glass-walled conference room assigned for our mediation. The space was dominated by a massive mahogany table equipped with built-in microphones and digital recording equipment. Sitting quietly in the corner was a certified court reporter, her fingers resting lightly on the keys of her stenotype machine. This was a crucial detail I had specifically requested. I did not want a casual off-the-record negotiation. I wanted every single lie, every fraudulent claim, and every arrogant demand permanently cemented into an official legal transcript. My attorney was already sitting at the table reviewing a thick stack of manila folders. Mr. Sterling had not come personally. As a titan of corporate law, his sudden appearance in a family law mediation would have immediately signaled to Darius that this was a corporate bloodbath, not a standard divorce. Instead, Mr. Sterling had sent his most vicious senior litigation partner, a brilliant woman named Evelyn Thorne. Evelyn was a former federal prosecutor who shared my deep appreciation for cold, hard facts and absolute legal destruction. We exchanged a brief knowing nod. We were entirely ready. 10 minutes later, the heavy glass door swung open and Darius walked in. He looked like he had just stepped straight off the cover of GQ magazine. He was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal pinstripe suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie that perfectly matched the pocket square folded sharply in his breast pocket. He looked incredibly handsome, perfectly rested and radiating a sickening level of arrogant confidence. He honestly believed he was walking into a complete slaughter where I was the sacrificial lamb. Flanking him was his attorney, a notorious Atlanta divorce lawyer named Richard Vance. Vance was widely known as an aggressive courtroom bulldog. He was the kind of lawyer who built his entire reputation on screaming at opposing counsel, intimidating witnesses, and bullying spouses into accepting terrible settlements just to make the emotional pain stop. He carried 2 massive leather briefcases and dropped them onto the mahogany table with a loud theatrical thud, clearly intended to assert his physical dominance in the room. Darius sat down directly across from me. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, leaned back in his expensive ergonomic chair, and offered me a small, patronizing smile. He looked completely relaxed. The mediator, a retired Superior Court judge with a stern face and zero tolerance for nonsense, walked into the room and took his seat at the head of the table. He quickly explained the ground rules for the mediation, reminding everyone that while the negotiations were meant to be collaborative, everything said today was being officially recorded by the court reporter. "Let us begin," the mediator said, folding his hands on the table. "Mr. Vance, since your client filed the initial petition, you have the floor. What are Mr. Washington's demands to dissolve this marriage?" Richard Vance stood up. He did not simply read from a piece of paper. He paced slightly, projecting his voice loudly as if he were delivering an opening statement to a packed jury rather than a quiet conference room. "Your Honor, this is a highly straightforward case of equitable distribution." Vance began fixing a hard, aggressive glare on me. "My client, Mr. Washington, has been the primary financial provider for the marital home for the past 5 years. During this time, he fully supported his wife while she pursued her CPA certifications and built her software consulting business. Despite his unwavering support, she became entirely neglectful of the marriage." Vance paused for dramatic effect, placing his hands flat on the mahogany table and leaning aggressively toward my side of the room. "We are demanding 3 specific things today. First, we demand sole undisputed ownership of the primary marital residence. The deed is already solely in my client's name, and he has paid every mortgage payment from his business accounts. We expect Mrs. Washington to formally waive any and all claims to the equity in that property." I sat perfectly still, my face a completely blank mask. Evelyn sat beside me, equally motionless, letting Vance perform his loud, aggressive circus act. Second, Vance continued, his voice rising in volume. "We are demanding a comprehensive alimony package. Mrs. Washington's software company and accounting practice have a massive future earning potential that vastly outstrips my client's current income. Mr. Washington's commercial real estate brokerage has struggled immensely over the last 2 years due to market fluctuations. He requires spousal support to maintain the standard of living he was accustomed to before his wife abandoned the marital home." The sheer audacity of the alimony demand was almost physically staggering. Darius was secretly embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from his own firm to rent a luxury downtown penthouse and buy diamond bracelets for his mistress, yet he had the absolute nerve to sit in this room and demand spousal support by claiming his business was struggling. But Vance was not finished. He reached into his leather briefcase and dramatically pulled out the thick-bound appraisal report that Chloe had falsified. He threw it onto the center of the table. "Finally, we addressed the marital assets," Vance declared loudly. 3 months ago, Mrs. Washington deposited a check for $100,000 derived from an early trust disbursement directly into a joint marital checking account. By doing so, she legally commingled those funds irrevocably, stripping the entire trust of its separate property status. We have provided the court with a certified independent appraisal of the real estate portfolio contained within that trust. The total market value is officially assessed at $6.8 million. Vance pointed a thick finger directly at me. My client legally demands exactly 50% of that commingled marital asset. $3.4 million payable immediately through the forced liquidation of the commercial properties. If she refuses, we will proceed to trial and let the judge freeze every single bank account she possesses for the next 3 years. Vance sat down looking immensely satisfied with his loud, aggressive performance. Darius was actually smiling now, a bright, triumphant grin. He looked at me across the table, his eyes practically screaming that he had won. The room fell completely silent save for the rapid, quiet clicking of the court reporter's stenotype machine. I did not look at Vance. I looked directly into my husband's arrogant eyes. I needed to lock him entirely into his own lies on the official record. "Before we respond to the demands," I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm and measured, "I just want to clarify a few specific financial points for the official transcript. Darius, you are stating under penalty of perjury that your commercial brokerage has been struggling financially for the last 2 years. Vance immediately bristled. "My client does not have to answer your direct interrogations. It is a simple clarifying question regarding his demand for alimony," Evelyn interjected smoothly, silencing Vance with a cold, professional glare. "If he is demanding my client's money, he needs to confirm his own financial hardship on the record." Darius waved his attorney off, completely confident in his own deception. "Yes, Charmaine," he said smoothly, leaning closer to the microphone. "The commercial market has been incredibly tough. My firm has barely broken even. I certainly do not have any hidden reserves or excess capital. That is exactly why I need the alimony." I nodded slowly, letting the court reporter type his fatal admission. "And this independent appraisal of my grandfather's portfolio." I continued tapping the thick document sitting in the middle of the table. "You are absolutely certain this is a fair, accurate, and completely unbiased market valuation. You do not have any personal or financial relationship with the appraiser who drafted this report." Darius laughed, a condescending sound that echoed in the glass room. "Do not be ridiculous, Charmaine. It is a court-certified appraiser. The numbers are completely accurate. 6.8 million is the absolute maximum that old portfolio is worth. Stop stalling and just accept the reality of the situation." I looked over at the court reporter. "Did you get all of that exactly as he said it?" I asked her politely. The court reporter nodded quickly, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. "Yes, ma'am." "Perfect," I whispered, leaning back in my chair. The trap was fully sprung. The steel jaws had clamped down hard on his ankle, and he had absolutely no idea he was already bleeding to death. He had just committed textbook perjury on an official court transcript, verified a fraudulent document, and lied about his hidden assets while demanding alimony. The mediator cleared his throat, sensing the sudden strange shift in the temperature of the room. My lack of panic was clearly confusing everyone except Evelyn. "Well," the mediator said, turning his attention to me, "the petitioner has made his demands incredibly clear. They are aggressive, but they have laid out their legal arguments regarding the commingled funds and the property valuation. Mrs. Washington, it is your turn. What is your counter-offer?" I did not look at the mediator. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Darius, watching the smug satisfaction radiating from his handsome face. I slowly reached down and unlatched my slim black leather briefcase. The metallic clicks sounded incredibly loud in the quiet conference room. I opened the lid and pulled out a single neatly organized stack of financial documents. "I have no counteroffer," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold and sharp as shattered glass. "I have a financial correction." I pulled a single piece of heavy bond paper from the top of my stack and slid it smoothly across the polished mahogany table directly toward Richard Vance. The bulldog attorney picked it up, expecting to see a desperate settlement offer. Instead, his thick eyebrows knitted together in profound confusion. "What exactly is this?" Mrs. Washington Vance demanded, waving the paper slightly in the air. "It is a certified bank statement from my primary personal checking account," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly conversational, "accompanied by a verified pay stub and an official tax form from my software consulting firm. It dates back to exactly 3 months ago, the precise week my husband suddenly experienced a severe financial emergency and begged me to help him pay down the primary mortgage on our home." Darius crossed his arms, leaning back with a smug, dismissive huff. "We already know about the check, Charmaine. We literally just put it on the official record. You commingled the funds." I turned my eyes to him, dropping the pleasant facade entirely. "I commingled my own earned income, Darius. Not my inheritance." The smug smile instantly vanished from his face. Vance sharply dropped his gaze back to the document in his hands, his eyes scanning the highlighted lines of data with sudden frantic urgency. "You see," I continued, speaking clearly for the court reporter, "that $100,000 check I deposited into our joint marital account did not come from my grandfather. It did not come from any trust disbursement. It was my annual performance bonus from my software company. It was money I earned through the business I built, while you falsely claimed I was neglecting our marriage. My grandfather's estate never transferred a single dime into our joint accounts." Vance swallowed hard. He looked at the certified deposit record, then at the W-2 form, and finally at his own client. The aggressive bluster had completely drained from the attorney's face. In family law, a commingling argument only works if you can definitively prove the specific funds originated from the separate inheritance. I had just provided undeniable court-certified proof that the money was simply my standard marital income. "This means," Evelyn chimed in, her voice ringing with absolute legal authority, "that the commingling argument your client constructed his entire divorce petition upon is completely invalid. The inheritance remains entirely separate property. It has never been blended, it has never been shared, and it is absolutely not subject to equitable distribution." Darius gripped the armrests of his leather chair. His knuckles turned stark white. He looked at his lawyer, panic finally bleeding into his voice. "Richard, do something. Tell them it does not matter. The money grew during the marriage. We have a right to the appreciation." Vance opened his mouth to pivot to that exact argument, but Evelyn was already moving. She reached into her own briefcase and pulled out a massive, leather-bound portfolio. The cover bore the heavy gold embossed seal of Elias Holdings. She did not slide this document. She dropped it directly onto the center of the mahogany table. The heavy thud echoed like a gavel striking a sound block. "Even if you attempted to argue marital appreciation, Mr. Vance, it would be a complete waste of the court's time," Evelyn stated, her eyes locking onto the opposing counsel with the lethal intensity of a former federal prosecutor. "Because you have fundamentally misunderstood the very nature of the asset you are trying to steal." Vance looked at the leather binder like it was a live explosive. "What is that?" "That is the last will and testament alongside the finalized estate structuring documents of Theodore Elias," Evelyn explained smoothly. "You and your client have been operating under the incredibly naive assumption that my client inherited $12 million in liquid cash or direct property deeds. She did not. Theodore Elias was a brilliant businessman who understood exactly how to protect his legacy from opportunistic spouses." I watched Darius carefully. The color was rapidly draining from his handsome face. He was staring at the leather binder, his chest rising and falling with shallow, erratic breaths. "My grandfather did not leave me $12 million, I said, taking over the explanation to ensure Darius heard it directly from my mouth. "He left me 100% control of Elias Holdings. Elias Holdings is not a standard corporate entity, Darius. It is an irrevocable trust. The absolute silence that fell over the glass conference room was deafening. The only sound was the frantic clicking of the court reporter capturing the exact moment my husband's entire multi-million-dollar extortion plot completely collapsed. Even if you do not know corporate law, Darius, your expensive attorney certainly does, I said, gesturing politely toward Vance. Richard, would you care to explain to your client exactly what an irrevocable trust means in the state of Georgia? Vance looked physically ill. He slowly took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He knew his client had just dragged him into an unwinnable legal bloodbath. An irrevocable trust. Vance muttered, his voice entirely lacking its previous booming confidence, is a legal entity that cannot be altered, amended, or dissolved by the creator once it is established. More importantly, the assets placed inside the trust no longer belong to the beneficiary personally. Exactly, Evelyn confirmed sharply. The trust owns the commercial real estate. The trust owns the bank accounts. My client is simply the designated trustee and the sole beneficiary. She does not hold personal title to a single brick of those buildings. Therefore, the marital estate owns absolutely nothing. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool mahogany table, bringing myself closer to Darius. You cannot freeze the trust, Darius. You cannot force a liquidation of the properties. You cannot demand $3.4 million because legally I do not own $3.4 million for you to take. The assets are completely untouchable by a spouse in a divorce proceeding. They are fortified behind an impenetrable legal wall. Darius looked like he had just been hit by a freight train. His jaw hung slack. He looked wildly between me, Evelyn, and his own attorney, desperately searching for a legal loophole, a technicality, any shred of hope that his massive gamble had not just exploded in his face. Richard, tell me she is lying, Darius demanded, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. Tell me we can break the trust. We have the appraisal. We proved the value. Vance looked at the fraudulent appraisal document sitting on the table. The document Chloe had risked her entire career to fabricate. Vance reached out and slowly slid the appraisal report back toward himself, actively distancing it from the center of the negotiations. He was a ruthless lawyer, but he was not an idiot. He suddenly realized his client was highly unstable and operating on deeply flawed, potentially dangerous information. If the assets are held in an irrevocable trust, Vance said quietly, not looking at Darius, then the appraisal is completely irrelevant. The court has no jurisdiction to divide those properties. We get nothing from the inheritance. Exactly $0. Darius let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. The reality of his situation was finally crashing down upon him with crushing, inescapable weight. He was not just walking away empty-handed. He was walking away owing $500,000 in embezzled corporate funds to his angry business partners. He had signed a massive lease on a luxury downtown penthouse he could no longer afford. He had promised his mistress millions of dollars in seed money to start a new brokerage firm that was now entirely unfunded. He had completely ruined his life for a massive payday that legally did not exist. The mediator cleared his throat, sensing the total collapse of the petitioner's case. Given this new documentation, Mr. Vance, do you wish to revise your client's demands? It appears the demand for 50% of the trust is a legal impossibility. Before Vance could even formulate a diplomatic retreat, Darius completely snapped. The sophisticated GQ cover model facade shattered into a million jagged pieces. He slammed both of his fists violently down onto the mahogany table. The heavy impact rattled the crystal water glasses and made the court reporter flinch physically in her corner chair. "You manipulative witch!" Darius screamed, entirely forgetting the mediator, the lawyers, and the official court transcript being recorded in real time. His face was twisted in a terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You planned this. You set me up. You deliberately hid the trust from me while I paid for your entire life. You set the commingling trap," Darius I replied coldly, completely unfazed by his tantrum. "I simply let you walk right into it." He stood up so violently his expensive ergonomic chair crashed backward onto the marble floor. He pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at my face. You think you have won? He roared, spit flying from his lips. You think you can just walk away and leave me with nothing? I still own the marital house. The deed is strictly in my name. I am going to sell that property. I am going to keep every single penny of the equity, and I am going to make sure you end up on the street with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back. You are not taking my home from me. I did not flinch at his aggressive outburst. I did not raise my voice to match his screaming. I simply looked down at my wrist, checking the time on my elegant silver watch. It was exactly 10:45 in the morning. I looked back up at my highly erratic husband, offering him a slow, chilling smile. Speaking of the house, Darius, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through his chaotic screaming. You might want to check on your mother. While Darius was standing in the glass conference room screaming about the house he mistakenly believed he still owned, a completely different type of financial nightmare was unfolding exactly 5 miles away. The sweltering Atlanta afternoon sun was beating down on the pristine asphalt parking lot of an exclusive organic grocery store in Buckhead. Keisha and Jamal were casually strolling out of the automatic sliding glass doors, pushing a silver shopping cart overflowing with premium imported cheeses, artisanal wines, and wildly expensive organic steaks. Keisha was wearing her designer sunglasses, chatting loudly on her cell phone to a friend about the massive boat party she was planning for the upcoming weekend. She was swiping her high-limit credit cards with absolute reckless abandon, entirely convinced that her brother's impending divorce settlement was going to elevate their entire family into a permanent state of unrestricted luxury. Jamal was walking lazily a few steps behind her, balancing a tray of expensive cold-pressed juices. He was wearing brand-new designer sneakers he had just purchased that morning, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine that was rapidly dropping toward their necks. As they rounded the corner of the parking aisle, Keisha suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. The expensive leather handbag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the hot asphalt. She ended her phone call without a single word of explanation and let out a piercing, high-pitched scream. Parked diagonally across two empty spaces was a massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck. Its diesel engine was idling loudly, thick exhaust fumes shimmering in the afternoon heat. The heavy hydraulic lift at the back of the truck was already fully engaged, lifting the front wheels of Keisha's pristine white Range Rover cleanly off the pavement. "Hey!" Keisha screamed at the top of her lungs, abandoning her grocery cart completely and sprinting across the hot parking lot in her expensive heels. "Put my car down right now. What do you think you are doing?" Jamal dropped the cold-pressed juices. The glass bottles shattered loudly across the asphalt, but he did not even look down. He jogged after his wife, trying desperately to quickly adopt a threatening, protective posture. The tow truck driver did not flinch. He was a massive, broad-shouldered man, wearing a high-visibility vest and thick leather work gloves. He had clearly dealt with screaming, entitled luxury car owners 1,000 times before. He calmly secured the heavy metal chains around the front axle of the Range Rover, checked the tension, and then turned to face the hysterical couple charging toward him. "You cannot take my car!" Keisha yelled. Her face flushed with a chaotic mixture of intense anger and sudden, blinding panic. "I am fully paid up. My brother handles the corporate lease payments for this vehicle through his brokerage firm. You have the wrong license plate. Unhook it right now before I call the police and have you arrested for grand theft auto." The repo man let out a tired, heavy sigh. He reached into the cab of his truck and pulled out a thick metal clipboard loaded with official legal documents. He stepped forward and shoved the clipboard directly toward Keisha's chest, forcing her to grab it or let it hit the ground. "I do not care who your brother is, lady," the repo man said, his voice entirely flat and completely devoid of any sympathy. "I just follow the paperwork. You are exactly 60 days past due on your premium financing agreement. The legal grace period expired yesterday. The vehicle is officially in default, and the lien holder ordered an immediate physical recovery of the asset." Keisha looked down at the paperwork, her hands trembling violently. "This is a massive mistake," she stammered, frantically scanning the complex legal jargon printed on the page. "The original financing company always gives us a 10-day extension. I just talked to them last month. They know the money is coming. The original financing company does not own your debt anymore," the repo man explained casually, leaning back against the side of his truck. You might want to read the name printed at the very top of that second page. They sold your distressed loan exactly 48 hours ago to a private corporate buyer. Keisha flipped the page over. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as she read the bold black font designating the new legal owner of her vehicle loan. The new lien holder was officially listed as a subsidiary debt collection agency completely owned and operated by Elias Holdings. She remembered my calm warning in the driveway just a few days ago. I had not been making a petty, empty threat. I had actually gone into the open commercial debt market and legally purchased the outstanding note on her luxury car, using the vast financial resources of my grandfather's trust. Once Elias Holdings owned the debt, my corporate lawyers had immediately exercised the acceleration clause hidden deep within the fine print of her original contract. Because she had missed 2 consecutive payments, the entire remaining balance of $80,000 was legally due in full immediately upon demand. "You cannot do this!" Keisha whispered, the aggressive fight completely draining out of her body, leaving nothing but sheer terror. "Where am I supposed to get $80,000 right now? How are we supposed to get home?" The repo man shrugged indifferently. He snatched the metal clipboard back out of her trembling hands and climbed up into the high cab of his truck. He slammed the heavy door shut, shifted the powerful diesel engine into drive, and pulled slowly out of the parking lot. Keisha and Jamal stood frozen in the sweltering heat, watching the pristine white Range Rover bounce slightly on the hydraulic lift as it disappeared down the busy Atlanta street. The groceries in their abandoned shopping cart were already beginning to rapidly melt under the aggressive summer sun. Jamal pulled out his smartphone with shaking hands and desperately tried to call Darius, but the call rolled immediately to a sterile voicemail greeting. Darius could not answer the phone to save his sister, because Darius was currently standing inside a glass conference room actively watching his own life completely disintegrate. Back in the Buckhead law firm, the tense silence following my comment about his mother was abruptly shattered. The heavy glass doors of our private conference room did not just open, they were violently shoved inward, slamming loudly against the metal doorstops. It was not a paralegal bringing fresh carafes of water, and it was not the mediator returning from a bathroom break. It was Brenda. My mother-in-law burst into the room looking entirely unhinged. Her expensive designer sunglasses were pushed wildly askew on top of her head, ruining her perfectly sprayed hair. She was hyperventilating, drawing in rapid, shallow breaths, as if she had just sprinted up 10 flights of stairs. She was clutching a thick, official-looking manila envelope tightly to her chest, like a physical shield against an invisible attacker. A highly stressed receptionist was jogging nervously right behind her, profusely apologizing to the room for failing to stop the frantic woman at the front desk. Darius stopped his aggressive screaming and stared at the doorway in absolute shock. "Mom, what in the world are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice dropping from a furious roar to a confused, embarrassed whisper. "We are in the middle of a highly confidential legal mediation. You cannot just burst in here." Brenda completely ignored her son. She did not even look at his high-priced attorney. Her wild, panicked eyes darted immediately across the mahogany table and locked directly onto me. She marched aggressively forward, her heels echoing sharply on the marble floor, and violently slammed the thick manila envelope down onto the center of the table right next to the fraudulent appraisal report. "They threw me out!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with a hysterical, terrified edge that made the court reporter physically recoil in her chair. "What are you talking about?" Darius asked, stepping quickly toward her and grabbing her shaking shoulders. "Who threw you out? Did you get into an argument with the landscapers again?" Brenda shook her head frantically, tears of absolute humiliation spilling over her expensive makeup and running down her cheeks. "Not the landscapers, Darius. The police. A Fulton County Sheriff's deputy just knocked loudly on the front door of the house. I was in the master bedroom packing my designer luggage for the Bora Bora trip, and I heard him pounding on the wood." She pointed a violently trembling finger down at the envelope on the table. "He did not come to ask questions." Brenda sobbed, struggling to catch her breath. "He came to officially serve a 24-hour emergency eviction notice. He told me I was legally trespassing on bank-owned property. He stood right there in our grand foyer and watched me pack a single garbage bag full of my clothes. He forced me to walk out the front door, and then he changed the deadbolt locks right in front of my face. We are completely locked out of the house, Darius. I have nowhere to go. Richard Vance, the aggressive bulldog attorney, reached out cautiously and pulled the manila envelope toward his side of the table. He opened the metal clasp and slid the legal documents out onto the polished mahogany surface. He quickly adjusted his reading glasses, his eyes scanning the bold, highly formalized legal text. Vance let out a low, deeply concerned exhale. He looked up at his client, the arrogant bluster entirely gone from his professional demeanor. Darius, this is a fully executed writ of possession. It is completely legal, highly expedited and binding. The primary marital property has been successfully foreclosed upon by a commercial lender. Darius snatched the heavy paper directly out of his lawyer's hands. He stared at the eviction notice, his eyes darting frantically back and forth across the dense legal jargon, desperately searching for a clerical error or a typo that would magically make this terrifying reality disappear. "This is completely impossible!" Darius exploded, his voice rising to a deafening, chaotic pitch. He crumpled the edge of the legal document in his fist and slammed it back down onto the table. "I pay the mortgage on that house. I pay it on the first of every single month directly from my corporate accounts. I have the digital bank receipts to prove it. I am in perfect standing with the lender. You cannot evict a homeowner from a property that is not in financial default." He turned his blazing, furious eyes toward me, pointing a rigid finger at my face. "You did this. You forged these eviction documents to try and intimidate my mother. You hacked into the municipal database and generated a fake foreclosure. I am going to have you federally arrested for severe legal fraud, Charmaine. I am going to make sure you rot in a prison cell for this." Evelyn Thorne simply raised a single eyebrow, completely unbothered by his wild, unhinged threats of federal prosecution. She looked at Vance, who was actively rubbing his temples, clearly realizing that his incredibly arrogant client had lied to him about the true financial state of the marital assets. Darius Vance asked slowly, his voice tight with rising frustration, "Did you miss any primary payments? Did you bounce a corporate check? Is there absolutely anything regarding the financial stability of this property that you conveniently failed to disclose to me when I agreed to take your case?" "I swear on my life, Richard. I paid the primary lender perfectly on time," Darius shouted defensively, waving his hands in the air. "I have never missed a single payment on that house." I remained seated in my ergonomic chair, entirely relaxed, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I looked at the screaming mother, the terrified lawyer, and my raging, completely cornered husband. I let the chaotic noise of their panic echo around the glass conference room for a few long seconds before I finally decided to deliver the fatal blow. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the cool mahogany table, and offered Darius a smile of pure surgical precision. "You pay the first mortgage, Darius," I said quietly, my calm voice cutting through his chaotic screaming like a razor blade through silk. "You didn't tell your lawyer about the secret second mortgage you took out to fund Chloe's penthouse, did you?" Richard Vance whipped his head around to stare at his client. The color drained from the veteran attorney's face so rapidly, he looked physically ill. "A second mortgage?" Vance asked, his voice a dangerous, quiet hiss. "Darius, what exactly is she talking about? Did you encumber the primary marital asset without disclosing it to me?" Darius opened his mouth, but absolutely no sound came out. His confident, arrogant posture completely collapsed in a matter of seconds. He looked like a man who had just stepped blindly off a steep ledge and was suspended in the air, simply waiting for the inevitable crushing impact with the ground. "Let me fill in the blanks for you, Richard," I offered smoothly, leaning back in my ergonomic chair and casually adjusting the cuffs of my suit jacket. About 6 months ago, Darius realized that his quiet embezzlement from his own commercial brokerage firm was not quite enough to sustain the incredibly lavish lifestyle his mistress Chloe demanded. He needed a massive injection of liquid capital to fund the downtown penthouse lease, the luxury vacations to Cabo, and the designer jewelry she expected. So he quietly took out a massive secondary mortgage on the Buckhead house. I paused intentionally, letting the severe gravity of the situation sink deeply into the quiet conference room. The major problem, Richard, is that he deliberately hid this secondary financing from his primary mortgage lender. That is a direct, undeniable violation of his primary loan covenants. It is the textbook legal definition of loan fraud. He knowingly falsified his financial disclosures to secure the quick cash, believing he could just pay it off silently once he successfully stole my family inheritance. Vance closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose in sheer frustration. He knew exactly what that meant. In the state of Georgia, intentionally hiding a massive secondary debt from a primary lien holder triggers an immediate non-negotiable default clause on the property. But that still does not explain how you evicted my mother today. Darius finally choked out his voice, trembling with a chaotic mixture of rising terror and lingering desperate defiance. The primary lender did not foreclose on me. I would have received official notices in the mail. I would have received phone calls from the bank warning me about the default. You did not receive any notices from the original bank, Darius, because the original bank no longer owns your fraudulent debt. Evelyn Thorne interjected, her voice dripping with absolute legal authority. She reached calmly into her briefcase and pulled out another pristine legal document, sliding it across the polished mahogany table to sit right next to the eviction notice Brenda had brought in. I picked up the narrative, ensuring Darius looked directly into my eyes, so he could witness his own destruction. When my grandfather's trust analysts were reviewing local distressed debt portfolios for investment opportunities, they stumbled across your highly toxic second mortgage. It was heavily flagged for severe high risk because of your rapidly deteriorating credit score and your hidden financial liabilities. So Elias Holdings quietly purchased that secondary debt for absolute pennies on the dollar. We officially became your new lender. Darius stared at me, his eyes wide and completely unblinking. The horrifying, inescapable realization was slowly washing over his face, erasing every trace of the handsome, confident broker he pretended to be. Once Elias Holdings officially owned the paper on your house, I explained, keeping my tone perfectly conversational and light, we simply conducted a standard routine audit of the borrower. We easily discovered the loan fraud you committed against the primary lender. Because you explicitly violated the core terms of your primary financing, your secondary mortgage was immediately triggered into default. My corporate attorneys exercised the acceleration clause. The entire remaining balance of the second mortgage was due in full immediately. I watched his chest heave with panicked, shallow breaths. When you failed to pay that massive balloon payment, which we knew you would since you were already actively embezzling money just to stay afloat, we legally foreclosed on the property. We bought the primary mortgage out of foreclosure, legally cleared the title, and executed a formal writ of possession. The house no longer belongs to you, Darius. It belongs entirely to Elias Holdings. And as the sole trustee of that holding company, I decided I did not want your mother living in my property anymore. So I had the sheriff forcibly remove her. The silence that followed my explanation was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The court reporter's fingers had completely stopped moving across her stenotype machine. She was openly staring at Darius with a complex mixture of professional shock and sheer human pity. Brenda stood frozen at the edge of the mahogany table. Her expensive designer sunglasses had completely fallen off the top of her head, clattering loudly onto the marble floor, but she did not even bother to look down. Her eyes were locked entirely onto her son, the golden child she had worshipped her entire life. The Morehouse man she had proudly claimed was far too educated and refined for a cold robotic software developer like me. A mistress. Brenda whispered, her voice cracking painfully in the silent room. The words seemed to physically burn her throat as she forced it out of her mouth. You lost our beautiful family home. You let the county sheriff throw me out onto the street like a common criminal in front of all my neighbors. And you did it all to pay for a penthouse for a cheap mistress. Darius frantically held his hands up, trying desperately to placate the woman who had enabled his toxic, selfish behavior his entire life. Mom, please listen to me. I can fix this. It is just a temporary financial setback. I am starting a new boutique firm with Chloe. We are going to make millions of dollars. I will buy you an even bigger house in Buckhead. Just give me a few days to sort out the legal paperwork and get some capital flowing." "You absolute fool!" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the thick glass walls of the conference room. "What legal paperwork? She just proved you do not own anything. You threw away a $12 million inheritance. You threw away a beautiful custom home. You threw your own mother out onto the pavement without a single dollar to her name." Brenda did not wait for him to formulate another pathetic, hollow excuse. She lunged forward with surprising speed, her arms swinging in a wide, vicious arc. The slap was absolutely deafening. It sounded like a sharp gunshot in the enclosed space. Brenda's palm connected squarely with Darius's jaw, snapping his head violently to the side. The sheer force of the blow actually made him stagger backward, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble floor. A bright, angry red handprint instantly bloomed across his perfectly shaved cheek. "You disgust me!" Brenda spat, her entire body trembling with absolute venom and profound, earth-shattering humiliation. "I defended you to my entire church congregation. I told everyone you were a brilliant, successful businessman. You are nothing but a lying, cheating, bankrupt fraud. Do not ever call my phone again." Brenda turned sharply on her heel, completely abandoning her crumpled manila envelope and her entirely shattered pride. She marched aggressively out of the conference room, shoving the heavy glass doors open and disappearing quickly down the carpeted hallway of the law firm. She had absolutely nowhere to go, no hidden money to fall back on, and her golden child had just been brutally exposed as a complete financial parasite. Darius stood trembling heavily in the center of the room, raising a shaking hand to hold his stinging cheek. He looked exactly like a hollow, broken shell of the arrogant man who had confidently walked into this building just an hour ago. He slowly turned his desperate, pleading eyes toward his bulldog attorney. Richard Darius choked out, his voice thick with rising, uncontrollable panic. "You have to file an emergency injunction right now. We can sue them for wrongful foreclosure. We can claim she used illegal insider information to buy the debt. Do something. You are my lawyer. You have to protect me." Richard Vance did not even look at his client. He was already efficiently packing his thick legal files back into his two massive leather briefcases. He snapped the heavy golden lock shut with a sharp, incredibly decisive click. "I am absolutely not your lawyer," Darius Vance said, coldly picking up his briefcases and calmly straightening his tailored suit jacket. "My firm's representation agreement explicitly stated that you must provide full and accurate financial disclosures. You lied to me about your assets. You blatantly lied to me about your liabilities. You actively committed perjury on an official court transcript within the first 10 minutes of this mediation. And most importantly, you clearly have absolutely zero liquid capital to pay my exorbitant legal fees." Vance walked smoothly around the mahogany table, completely bypassing Darius as if he were a piece of broken furniture. He stopped briefly near my chair and offered Evelyn Thorne a short, professional nod of profound respect. "Well played, counselor." "Thank you, Richard," Evelyn replied smoothly, not breaking her perfectly professional composure. "Have a very pleasant afternoon." Vance walked out of the room without looking back a single time, leaving his completely ruined, financially devastated client standing entirely alone in the crosshairs of my revenge. The mediator let out a long, heavy breath, officially recognizing that the entire legal proceeding had completely collapsed beyond any hope of repair. Since the petitioner's legal representation has formally withdrawn and the core assets are clearly no longer in dispute, this mediation is officially terminated, the judge announced quietly. He gathered his leather-bound notes, offered me a small, deeply sympathetic smile, and exited the room, followed quickly by the wide-eyed court reporter clutching her stenotype machine. Suddenly, there was absolutely no one left in the massive glass room but me, Evelyn, and my cheating husband. Darius looked around the empty space, the terrifying reality of his absolute isolation finally sinking deep into his bones. He had lost his wife. He had lost his mistress's respect. He had lost his beautiful home, his enabling mother, and his aggressive legal representation, all in the span of 60 brutal minutes. He was entirely broke, heavily in debt to angry corporate partners, and standing entirely alone in the smoking ruins of a life he had intentionally destroyed out of sheer, unadulterated greed. He looked at me sitting calmly at the table. The sharp, freezing realization of my absolute power finally broke his arrogant spirit completely. His knees actually buckled beneath him. He dropped heavily to the polished marble floor, the expensive fabric of his charcoal pinstripe suit wrinkling and pooling awkwardly around him. He crawled slightly forward on his hands and knees, stopping just a few feet away from my chair. Hot tears began to spill rapidly over his eyelashes, streaming down his red, stinging cheek. It was not a calculated courtroom performance anymore. It was the raw, pathetic, ugly weeping of a man staring directly into the terrifying abyss of his own consequences. "Charmaine, please," Darius sobbed loudly, his voice breaking pathetically as he looked up at me. "I am so incredibly sorry. I completely lost my mind. I got caught up in the flashy lifestyle. Chloe manipulated me into wanting more. She told me I deserved more than I had. I never really wanted to hurt you like this. Please, you have to leave me something. You cannot just take everything." I looked down at the man I had once loved, the man I had supported and trusted, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. "I have nothing, Charmaine," he begged, clasping his trembling hands tightly together in front of his chest in a desperate prayer. "My mother completely hates me. My lawyer abandoned me. The house is entirely gone. The trust money is gone. Just let me keep the brokerage. Just let me walk away with my business, Charmaine. Please, I can start over from scratch. I can rebuild my life. Just let me have my firm." I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up to my full height. I looked down at him, kneeling pathetically on the floor, surrounded by the invisible wreckage of his lies and betrayal. I reached down and calmly picked up my slim black leather briefcase, snapping the metallic latches shut with a satisfying click. I leaned down slightly, bringing my face much closer to his tear-streaked, desperate, pleading eyes. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet, chilling certainty of an executioner delivering the final, inescapable verdict. "You do not have a business anymore, Darius," I whispered softly. "You have a crime scene." I reached back into my slim black leather briefcase and pulled out the final item I had brought to this mediation. It was not a single sheet of paper like the bank statement. It was a massive, brutally heavy document bound in thick black plastic. It contained exactly 300 pages of highly dense, meticulously cross-referenced financial data. I dropped it onto the mahogany table right in front of his kneeling form. The heavy thud seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "This is a comprehensive forensic audit of your commercial real estate brokerage," I explained, looking down at his tear-streaked face. "I spent the last 5 days tracking every single digital footprint you left behind. I mapped the hidden Delaware shell company Apex Horizon. I documented the 54 separate wire transfers you initiated over the last 2 years. I traced the fake marketing invoices you generated to justify moving capital out of your primary operating accounts." Darius stared blankly at the thick black binder. He did not reach out to open it. He simply let his eyes trace the bold white lettering on the cover. "You embezzled exactly $500,000 from your own business partners." I continued, my voice entirely devoid of pity. "You drained your firm's operational liquidity to lease a penthouse and buy diamond bracelets for a woman you met at a networking mixer. You are entirely bankrupt, Darius, and worse than that, you are a thief." Before Darius could even attempt to formulate a pathetic response to the undeniable proof of his corporate crimes, the heavy glass doors of the conference room were violently thrown open for the second time that afternoon. I looked up to see Chloe charging into the room. She was wearing a sharp emerald green designer suit, clearly intending to look like a highly successful corporate executive arriving to claim her hard-earned prize. Darius must have frantically texted her from under the table when my lawyer first dismantled his commingling argument, begging her to come and help him salvage their criminal enterprise. Chloe stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the complete devastation inside the room. She saw Richard Vance's empty chair. She saw the crumpled eviction notice sitting on the table. And then she looked down and saw her handsome, arrogant boyfriend kneeling pathetically on the marble floor, openly weeping. "Darius, what in the world is going on?" Chloe demanded, her sharp voice echoing loudly in the empty space. She marched forward, her heels clicking aggressively. "You texted me that there was a minor legal complication with the trust. Why is your lawyer gone? Where is our seed money?" Darius could not even look at her. He kept his eyes locked firmly on the marble floor, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "There is no seed money, Chloe," I answered for him, my voice completely calm and steady. "And unfortunately for you, there is no boutique commercial brokerage in your future either." Chloe whipped her head around to glare at me. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you can just outsmart us with your expensive corporate lawyers?" she sneered, taking a threatening step toward my side of the table. "We have the official property appraisal. The court has to recognize the valuation. You are going to liquidate those buildings, or we will tie you up in litigation for the next 10 years. I did not flinch. I slowly reached out and tapped the thick black binder sitting on the table. "Have you ever seen a fully completed forensic audit, Chloe?" I asked politely. "It is truly a beautiful piece of literature. It details every single federal crime your boyfriend committed to fund your lavish lifestyle. And the best part is it directly links the embezzled funds to your private offshore accounts." Chloe scoffed loudly, crossing her arms over her chest, trying desperately to maintain her aura of untouchable superiority. "You are completely bluffing. You cannot access my private accounts." "I do not need to access them," I replied smoothly. "The federal government will do that for me. But let us talk about something much more immediate. Let us talk about your professional career." I picked up my smartphone from the table and woke up the screen. "When I visited your stolen penthouse a few days ago, I took a very clear high-resolution photograph of the fraudulent appraisal document you drafted for my grandfather's estate, the one where you deliberately undervalued prime commercial real estate by 40% to facilitate a corporate heist." Chloe's confident posture finally cracked. A flicker of genuine terror flashed across her eyes, but she quickly tried to mask it with aggressive bluster. "A picture of a draft document proves absolutely nothing. It proves enough for the Georgia Real Estate Appraisers Board," I countered, smiling coldly. "While Darius was busy screaming at his lawyer 10 minutes ago, my team securely forwarded that photograph, along with a certified comparative market analysis, directly to the state licensing board. They take court manipulation incredibly seriously." I paused, letting the silence stretch tightly between us before delivering the fatal blow. "The board voted on an emergency injunction 30 minutes ago. Your professional appraisal license has been suspended immediately, pending a full criminal investigation. You are officially barred from practicing real estate valuation in the state of Georgia. You will never appraise a single property ever again." Chloe physically staggered backward, as if I had just struck her across the face. Her mouth opened and closed silently, entirely incapable of processing the sudden, absolute destruction of the prestigious career she had spent over a decade building. "No," she finally gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. "No, they cannot do that without a formal hearing. That is completely illegal. You can argue the administrative technicalities with the state investigators," Evelyn Thorne interjected sharply, pointing a manicured finger toward the center of the mahogany table. "But I highly suggest you worry about your criminal defense instead. The state board is just the beginning. The fraud you committed on that official court document carries a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison." Chloe looked down at the center of the table. The digital recording console built into the mahogany wood was still glowing with a bright blinking red light. The mediator had been in such a frantic rush to escape Darius's screaming tantrum that he had completely forgotten to turn off the official recording system. Every single word spoken in this room was still being permanently captured on the official legal transcript. The primal instinct for self-preservation is a terrifying thing to witness. The absolute second Chloe fully realized she was facing years in a federal penitentiary for a racketeering conspiracy, her loyalty to Darius evaporated entirely. She turned violently toward the man kneeling on the floor. "You completely ruined my life!" Chloe shrieked, her voice tearing through the room like a jagged saw. She lunged forward and kicked Darius sharply in the thigh with her pointed toe. He cried out in pain and scrambled backward on the marble floor. "I told you this was too incredibly risky!" she screamed, pointing frantically at the blinking red light on the recording console. "He made me do it," she yelled directly toward the microphone, her voice entirely hysterical. Darius orchestrated the entire thing. He told me the commingling trap was absolutely foolproof. He transferred the stolen firm money to my accounts. He explicitly promised me $6 million in clean cash if I altered the final appraisal numbers. I have text messages. I have emails proving he masterminded the entire racketeering plot. I will give you everything you need to lock him away forever. Darius stared at the woman he had destroyed his marriage for, watching her eagerly trade his freedom for a slightly reduced prison sentence. "Chloe, stop talking," he begged, weakly holding his hands up to shield his face from her wrath. "You are confessing to federal crimes on tape." "I do not care!" Chloe shrieked wildly, tears of pure panic streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. "I'm not going down for your pathetic, sloppy mistakes. You told me she was just a stupid, gullible software nerd. You told me this would be incredibly easy. You are a complete failure." She spun around, grabbed her designer handbag, and sprinted blindly out of the conference room. The heavy glass doors slammed shut behind her, leaving a ringing silence in her wake. She was rushing out to find a criminal defense attorney, hoping to secure a plea deal before the federal indictments dropped. Darius slowly lowered his hands. He looked utterly devastated, completely hollowed out by the rapid consecutive betrayals of everyone he thought he controlled. He slowly pulled himself up from the floor and slumped heavily into the nearest leather chair, burying his face in his hands. Then the sharp, cheerful ringtone of a cell phone broke the heavy silence. It was coming from Darius's suit pocket. He ignored it at first, but the phone kept ringing relentlessly. "Answer it!" I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute authority. Darius mechanically reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He stared at the caller ID with blank, uncomprehending eyes. He swiped the screen and brought the phone slowly to his ear. "Hello," he whispered. Even from across the wide mahogany table, I could hear the loud, frantic sobbing coming from the tiny speaker. It was his brother-in-law, Jamal. Darius. Jamal wailed, his voice completely high-pitched and entirely unrecognizable. "Man, you have to help us. Everything is completely gone." Darius closed his eyes tightly. "What is gone, Jamal?" "My credit cards." Jamal sobbed loudly into the phone. "The bank accounts. I was just trying to buy gas for Keisha's rental car, and the machine declined everything. I called the corporate bank to see if there was a fraud alert, and they transferred me to a federal agent." Darius's eyes snapped wide open. A federal agent! Jamal was weeping uncontrollably, now his words barely coherent. "The IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Darius. They completely froze every single account tied to my name and Keisha's name. The agent told me we were being actively investigated for severe tax evasion and corporate payroll fraud." Darius dropped the phone directly onto the mahogany table. He did not even bother to end the call. Jamal's frantic sobbing continued to echo faintly from the speaker, a pathetic soundtrack to the absolute financial slaughter of their entire toxic family. I knew exactly why the accounts were frozen. During my forensic audit, I discovered that Darius had placed both Keisha and Jamal on his brokerage firm's official payroll as phantom employees. They never worked a single hour for the company, but they received massive salaries and company credit cards, which Darius used to fraudulently reduce his corporate tax burden. They had been actively participating in tax evasion for 3 years, eagerly spending the illegal money to fund their flashy lifestyles. In a single afternoon, the entire family had been completely financially eradicated. Brenda was homeless. Keisha had lost her luxury car. Jamal was facing federal tax evasion charges. And Darius had lost his business, his mistress, and his freedom. Darius looked up from the phone. His face was completely ashen, entirely devoid of any blood or life. His hands were shaking so violently they rattled against the polished wood of the table. He finally realized that standard corporate audits do not trigger instant IRS asset freezes. The federal government moves incredibly slowly unless they are handed a perfectly packaged, undeniable criminal referral by an industry expert. He stared at me, his eyes wide with an absolute primal fear. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice trembling so hard he could barely form the words. "Who did you send this to?" I looked down at the man trembling on the marble floor, my expression completely impassive. I reached for the handle of my black leather briefcase and snapped the final metallic lock into place. "I did not send it to the family court, Darius. I sent it to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The color completely vanished from his face. He looked exactly like a corpse that had suddenly been forced to breathe. Family court judges only care about the equitable distribution of marital assets. They do not possess the legal jurisdiction to prosecute complex multi-state corporate fraud rings. I made sure to clarify to him that when my attorney submitted the formal criminal referral on behalf of the trust, the federal authorities moved with absolute terrifying speed. The FBI loves a perfectly documented paper trail, and Darius had left them a massive digital highway leading right to his front door. He had meticulously provided the wire transfers, the fake marketing invoices, and the fraudulent appraisal document. It was a perfectly packaged federal indictment wrapped in a neat bow. Evelyn stood up from the mahogany table, smoothly adjusting her professional suit. "Let us go," she commanded with lethal authority. "The mediator has officially canceled the room reservation, and I have absolutely no desire to spend another second breathing the air in this room." Darius stumbled to his feet. He moved like a mechanical toy with a broken mainspring. We walked out of the glass conference room and headed down the long, heavily carpeted corridor toward the main reception area of the law firm. Darius was dragging his expensive Italian leather shoes, his tailored pinstripe suit completely ruined by his time spent groveling on the floor. For 5 years, I had walked a step behind this man playing the role of the quiet, supportive wife, while he secretly drained my self-esteem and mocked my ambition. Now he was walking ahead of me, not as a leader, but as a prisoner, marching directly toward his own execution. The shift in power was absolute and irreversible. He did not speak. He did not try to argue. His mind was entirely shattered by the sheer magnitude of his impending incarceration. As we turned the corner into the expansive sunlit marble lobby, the scene unfolding was one of absolute perfect chaos. Chloe had not made it very far in her desperate attempt to flee the building. She was standing near the towering glass entrance doors, frantically arguing with two severe-looking men wearing dark windbreakers with bold yellow lettering across the back. FBI. They already had her wrists secured firmly behind her back in heavy steel handcuffs. Her emerald green designer suit was wrinkled, and her expensive leather handbag had been dropped, spilling premium cosmetics and keys across the polished floor. She was loudly demanding her lawyer, her previous untouchable arrogance entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but a terrified criminal facing a concrete cell. The exact moment Darius stepped into the main lobby area, 2 more federal agents immediately flanked him. They moved with swift, practiced military precision. Darius Washington, one of the agents, asked, his voice echoing loudly in the cavernous quiet space of the high-end law firm. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and corporate embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." When Chloe saw Darius walking out in cuffs, she started screaming at him again from across the lobby, blaming him loudly to the arresting agents, offering to turn state's evidence right there on the spot. There is absolutely no honor among thieves, especially when faced with federal mandatory minimum sentences. The agent forcibly turned Darius around and locked the cold steel cuffs around his wrists. The sharp metallic click of the locking mechanism seemed to echo forever in the high-ceilinged room. Suddenly, a high-pitched, agonizing wail shattered the tense air. Brenda had not left the building after all. She had been lingering near the marble elevator banks, completely paralyzed by her own sudden homelessness and absolute lack of transportation. When she saw the federal agents actively hauling her precious, highly educated golden child away in chains, her legs entirely gave out beneath her. She collapsed heavily onto the polished marble floor, weeping uncontrollably. She buried her face in her trembling hands, her wails echoing off the glass walls, as her entire fabricated world was completely obliterated. She had built her entire identity on her son's fake success, and now she was left with absolutely nothing. The agents marched Darius and Chloe forcefully through the automatic glass doors and out onto the bright Buckhead sidewalk. I followed closely behind them, flanked securely by Evelyn. As we stepped out into the warm Atlanta air, a battered cheap economy Uber pulled up aggressively to the curb, its brakes squealing loudly. The back doors flew open, and Keisha and Jamal scrambled out onto the pavement. They looked exhausted, intensely sweaty, and completely frantic. They had clearly rushed straight from the grocery store parking lot after watching the repo man drive away with Keisha's luxury car. They froze dead on the sidewalk. Their jaws dropped in unison as they watched the federal agents shove Darius and Chloe into the back of dark armored government vehicles. Keisha screamed her older brother's name in sheer panic, but a stern agent stepped firmly into her path, holding a heavy hand up to block her advance. Jamal simply stared in absolute horror. He realized in that exact moment that the same federal authorities hauling his brother away had just permanently frozen his bank accounts. They had spent their entire adult lives feeding off Darius's fraudulent success, treating me like an unwanted outsider. Now the host parasite was dead, and they were completely exposed to the harsh reality of the real world. The grand illusion of their elite family status was officially dead and buried right there on the sun-baked concrete. I did not stop to gloat. I did not deliver a dramatic, lingering speech about justice karma or the pain they had caused me over the last 5 years. They were officially no longer worth my time, my energy, or my breath. I simply adjusted my grip on my briefcase, stepped smoothly and elegantly around my weeping mother-in-law who was still sobbing on the lobby floor, and walked purposefully toward the curb. A sleek, armored black SUV was idling quietly, just a few yards away from the chaotic federal convoy. The driver, wearing a sharp black suit and an earpiece, immediately stepped out and opened the heavy rear door for me. I thanked him quietly and slid into the plush, incredibly quiet leather interior. Evelyn gave me a final, respectful nod of ultimate victory from the sidewalk before turning to walk toward her own vehicle. The driver closed my heavy door securely, walked around the front of the massive vehicle, and slid behind the steering wheel. He glanced back at me through the rearview mirror, his hands resting professionally on the leather wheel. "Where to, Ms. Washington?" he asked respectfully. I reached into my bag and pulled out my dark designer sunglasses. I slipped them on completely, shielding my eyes from the pathetic, chaotic scene unfolding on the sidewalk outside. "To the Elias Holdings headquarters," I said, my voice strong, steady, and entirely free. "The CEO has arrived."